Chapter 941. Coming to the cliff, Ning-Ke looked at the giant peak of the giant sinkhole and the temple between the peaks in silence. This was the second time he had seen the true face of Xiankong Temple, but he was still shocked. The cliff was very steep, and it suddenly sank from the surface of the wilderness, which was quite shocking. Ning-Ke left the big black horse and the carriage on the ground and followed Sang-Sing down. He and Sang-Sing had been here before, but they turned away after a glance from a distance, not daring to go down. The situation now was naturally different from before. Sang-Sing looked calm and walked slowly with her hands behind her back, like a snow lotus falling in the wind. But Ning-Ke, who was behind her, looked a little embarrassed. It was noon, and the early autumn sunshine was bright enough to clearly illuminate the smooth cliff and the narrow path made of gravel. But the cliff was thousands of feet deep, and the further they went, the darker the light became, and the temperature gradually dropped. It was very cold, and there was even snow between the cliff stones, which was quite amazing. They continued to walk in the cold world of ice and snow. After a long time, they finally walked out of the shadow cast by the wilderness into the giant sinkhole and came to the bright sunshine. There was a boundless field under the sunshine. The field at the bottom of the sinkhole was very wide. Even with Ning-Ke's sharp eyesight, he could not clearly see the scene in the distance. There were all kinds of yurts scattered in the field. On the ground near the cliff, there were cold-resistant meadows. Cows and sheep with long fluffy hair were eating in meadows. Contrary to the process of walking down the cliff, the two of them walked toward the center of the giant sinkhole field. The temperature was getting higher and higher, as if it was going to warm spring from winter. The natural grass in the field was gradually replaced by artificially cultivated species, and the ears in the field kept swaying in the breeze to greet them. Ning-Ke walked to the field and picked an ear. He rubbed the shell with his fingers and found that the grain inside was much smaller than the rice commonly seen in the Central Plains, and the grain fragrance was a little strange. He pulled one out and found that the root system of this plant was quite developed. He guessed that this was probably a special kind of rice, which could resist the cold by absorbing the warmth from the ground. Judging from the shape of the leaves, it probably had a relatively low demand for light. This underground wilderness was far away from the human world, so the sunlight was not as abundant as it was on the surface. Fortunately, Hao-Ian was always fair. The temperature of the soil in the wilderness was a little high, and the rivers flowing through it were different from the cold rivers in Ning-Ke's imagination. They were covered with a light mist like a hot spring. This underground field was a completely new world for Ning Quebec. Of course, because of his poor background and the influence of the academy, what he cared most about was food. At this moment, a faint bell suddenly rang in the distance, and then a pious, buzzing sound came from all directions in the field, attracting his attention. He looked into the distance and vaguely saw countless people kneeling on the ground. He knew that they should be the farmers who worshipped the Xiankong Temple. They started chanting after hearing the bell. The sound of the bell came from an even further distance, coming from the huge mountain peak in the middle of the vast wilderness. It was unknown which yellow temple or hall in the middle of the peak was the monk who was striking the bell. Sang-Sing walked toward the mountain. Ning-Ke suddenly thought of something, but he missed it and could not remember it again. He shook his head regretfully and quickened his pace. The mountain was very tall and majestic. He could feel the pressure from miles away, as if it was right in front of him, but in fact the mountain was still in the sky. Sang-Sing did not say anything and walked toward the mountain. Although she and Ning-Ke did not deliberately, they still walked very fast. Even so, it still took them a long time to walk to the foot of the mountain. It was already dusk. The world at dusk should be warm, but for the world in the giant sinkhole, there was only darkness and coldness. The setting sun in the west could not reach here at all. The vast field at the bottom of the pit and the entire mountain were shrouded in shadows. Only the highest peak was still in the twilight, like a candle flame. Looking at the mountain road in the night, Ning-Ke quietly adjusted his breath and was ready for battle. Although Sang-Sang was unimaginably powerful, and even the chief monk of scripture was just a stone under her feet, the Xiankong Temple on this mountain was, after all, the unknown place of Buddhism. It had been passed down for countless years and had a deep foundation. Who knew what kind of dangers were hidden in it? Sang Sang suddenly stopped and turned to look at the road they came from. Ninkei felt a little strange. He followed her gaze and saw that the cliff they came down from at noon had become a scenery far away, and the snow between the cliffs had long been gone. The cliffs around the giant sinkhole were very far from the bottom of the mountain. According to common thinking, the cliff should have become an inconspicuous black line, but it was still towering at this time. The long cliff was too high. The mountain where the Xiankong Temple was located was higher than any mountain on the surface of the earth, but the peak was only level with the surface of the wilderness. This meant that the cliff surrounding the giant sinkhole was as high as the mountain and higher than any other mountain in the world. Ning Kei and Sang Sang stood here and looked around. They felt that the giant sinkhole was a huge dry well, and the high cliff was the wall of the well. The people standing at the bottom of the well were blocked by the wall of the well. The people living here had seen the round sky for generations, while the fields in the field were square and incomparably orderly. Was this the so-called round sky and square earth? Ninkei looked at the scene in front of him and thought with some shock. Sang Sang couldn't help but feel shocked. She only made such a comment about this magical world created by Buddha, a frog in a well. The two did not continue to stay. They walked directly to the peak under the cover of the night. The mountain road, hidden in the forest and flowers, was not as steep as before, but it was long as if there was no end. The big black horse and the horse carriage were left on the ground. Ning Kei naturally carried all the things that could not be separated from him. At the moment when Sang Sang boldly decided to come to the Xiankong Temple to confirm the life and death of Buddha, he had made clear his identity. He was a handyman, porter, cook, feet-washing technician, and bed warmer. He had no objection to this. It was a couple's life, and someone had to take care of the outside and the inside. Since his wife had the ability to take care of the outside, why not he take care of the inside? The heavy arrow case and iron cutlass, the big black umbrella, and the Buddha's chessboard were carefully packed into the luggage, which was now on his back. The luggage was too heavy, and the mountain road between the peaks was so long. Even though he had cultivated the great spirit and was extremely strong, he still felt a little tired. The mountain was too big, and there were too many yellow temples hidden in the forest. It was said that Yueluan Kingdom was a prosperous place for Buddhism, and there were 72 temples in Misty Rain. In an hour, he and Sang Sang had already seen more than this number of temples. Since Sang Sang was here to find someone, she naturally had to go to every temple. This meant that they had to walk a longer distance, which also meant that Ning Kei had to walk a longer distance with the heavy luggage, and he was climbing a slope. When they passed by each temple, Sang Sang did not look carefully, so it was hard to tell what method she was using. When they walked to the edge of the cliff, Ning Kei finally sat down on a stone. "Let's rest for a while." He wiped his sweat and said while panting, "I don't think it's a good idea to search blindly." Sang Sang was naturally not tired, but she felt a little tired and sleepy like she had been since they left Peach Mountain. She walked with her eyes closed most of the time, as if she was really sleeping. Of course, she did look like a blind person walking. Listening to Ning Kei's words, she said indifferently, "Do you want me to die so badly?" Ning Kei understood why she was so anxious to confirm whether Buddha was dead or alive. If Buddha was still alive, he would be the only existence in the world that could threaten her. She had to kill Buddha while she was still strong enough. Otherwise, she would be in great danger when she returned to the Divine Kingdom or became immortal. In this case, her words made sense. But he felt bored and said while covering his forehead, "Can you put it another way? You have said it so many times. Aren't you tired of it? Can you not seek death at the slightest provocation? Although we are husband and wife, you can't really treat yourself as an ordinary woman." Sang Sang ignored him and said, "If I want to find someone, I will. Where is the person you're looking for?" Ning Kei came to Xiankong Temple mainly to accompany her, but also to find someone. Outside the academy, Seventh Sister had specifically told him to come here and see if that proud man was still as proud as he was now kneeling in front of the Buddha. Along the way from the foot of the mountain, Sang Sang had searched hundreds of yellow temples in the lower half of the mountain. But he just followed her and did not look like he was looking for someone. He said, "Senior brother will definitely not cultivate Buddhism here. Why waste your energy?" Sang Sang asked why. Ning-Ke said with certainty, "Senior brother is such a genius. Who in Xiankong Temple is qualified to teach him? He must be reading Buddhist scriptures in the temple on the peak. Why would he linger in these shabby temples at the foot of the mountain?" Sang Sang thought for a while and looked at him. She said, "Idiot." Ning-Ke thought that his inference was so reasonable, but she did not think of it. How could she call him an idiot? Koharan could not bear it, and neither could Aunt Xiao. "How am I an idiot?" he asked angrily. Sang Sang ignored him and continued to walk up the mountain with her hands behind her. Ning-Ke carried his heavy luggage and ran behind her. He kept asking himself how he was an idiot. She knew that her man liked to call others idiots. How could she call him an idiot for no reason? They searched all the way, but the temple was deserted at night. They searched all the hundreds of yellow temples and the dozens of cliffs at the foot of the mountain, but still found nothing. Finally, they came to the top of the mountain, and the night had passed. The new morning sun was still lying on the surface of the wilderness. The morning light first illuminated the cliff in the west, and then the peak. It was like a candle wick that had been extinguished for a whole night was reignited. Then the light spread from the peak to the foot of the mountain at a speed visible to the naked eye. The bell rang, and the Buddhist chants were heard. The Buddhist land was thus awakened. Chapter 1. P.S. I don't have time to revise it recently. If there are any rough parts, just blink and pretend you didn't see it. Sorry, keep writing. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 942. When the Buddha land woke up, countless monks in the yellow temples also woke up. But as the saying goes, as long as Sang Sang is in my hand, I am in the human world. Ning-Ke was not worried about being found by the Xiankong Temple, so he continued to look around like last night. He would go into every yellow temple and carefully observe if there was any trace of his senior brother. It was a time-consuming thing, so it was Sang Sang's turn to feel troubled. On a cliff platform covered by ivy, she turned to Ning-Ke and asked, "Are you looking for Junimo?" Ning-Ke said, "Of course. I can't help you find Buddha." Sang Sang said, "Idiot." After saying this, she continued to walk forward on the cliff platform. Ning-Ke was stunned. He was not as angry as last night, but confused. Why did she say he was an idiot? As the indigo dress moved forward, the ivy separated and Sang Sang walked by. Ning-Ke quickened his pace to catch up with her before the ivy swung back. Then he found that the cliff platform was a little strange. There was an unknown tree on the edge of the cliff with a green canopy, which was very quiet. There was a very small temple behind the pine tree. The yellow paint had long peeled off, and the stone steps were covered with dust. It seemed that no one had been here for many years. Along the way from the foot of the peak, all the temples were either magnificent or sacred. Ning-Ke and Sang Sang had never seen such a dilapidated temple, which was very strange. What made Ning-Ke even more strange was that he felt a faint familiar aura from the dilapidated temple. He and Sang Sang had practiced Buddhism in the Lang Temple, so they could sense the supreme Buddha nature in the aura. The trace of Buddha nature was very pure and compassionate, and very powerful, even more powerful than the Buddha nature they felt in the temples last night. How could a temple with such pure Buddha nature be so dilapidated? How could the monks in the Xiankong Temple forget this temple? Who used to live in this shabby temple? Was this the place Sang Sang was looking for? Could it be that the Buddha was hiding here? Standing under the tree on the edge of the cliff, Ning-Ke looked at the dilapidated temple and suddenly felt a little cold. He subconsciously leaned to Sang Sang and asked, "Is it here?" Sang Sang looked a little serious, but she did not say anything and walked directly into the temple. The temple door was pushed open with a squeak. When the cobwebs were about to fall, a breeze blew and swept to the endless abyss under the cliff. After entering, Ning-Ke found that it was a fake temple. Standing on the cliff platform, he could only see the front of the temple. There was not even a Zen temple inside, but only a dusty corridor. The corridor led straight to the cliff, and there was a deep cave on the wall. Ninkei became more and more nervous, but Sang Sang remained calm. She walked directly into the cave and looked around with her hands clasped behind her back, showing a touch of annoyance on her face. The cave was quiet and dry. The furnishings inside were extremely simple, even simpler than the cliff cave where Ninkei had secluded himself in the back mountain of the academy. There was only a futon. The futon was lying in front of the deepest cave wall, covered with dust. The futon was covered with dust. The futon was in A. There was a shadow on the stone wall opposite the futon. Looking closely, one could find that the shadow was a human figure, and the cloud edge of the Kasaya could be vaguely seen on the edge. A long time ago, there was a monk who meditated here and faced the wall. He sat there for countless years and even left his figure on the stone wall. Which eminent monk was he? Ninkei was very shocked. Sang Sang did not care who the eminent monk was. She took a look and knew that the person was not the Buddha she was looking for, so she was a little annoyed. "You are too slow. Don't follow me." After saying this, she walked out of the cave. Ninkei looked at her back and said, "I also want to find someone." Sang Sang did not look back and said, "Idiot." Ninkei did not want to be angry and said, "Even if I am an idiot, I still want to find someone. What if we get lost?" Sang Sang said, "I can find you." After Sang Sang left, there was only Ninkei in the cave. He looked at the shadow on the stone wall and shook his head. He was ready to leave, but he slowly stopped at the entrance of the cave. Previously, under the tree on the cliff plateau, he felt that the aura from the ruined temple was very familiar. Now in the cave, this feeling became more and more obvious. He even felt that he had seen the shadow on the stone wall somewhere. Ninkei thought for a while and turned back to the depth of the cave. He looked at the shadow on the stone wall and thought for a long time. Then he felt a little tired and sat on the ground. He forgot that the futon in front of the stone wall was so old that it could not stand people sitting on it. As soon as his body touched the futon, it scattered into countless cattail grass and floated everywhere. What the hell is this? Ninkei looked at the cattail grass on the ground and shook his head helplessly. He reached out and gathered all the loose grass together. Then he took out a needle and thread from his luggage and began to sew skillfully. It did not take long for him to mend the futon. He tried to make sure that the futon would not be damaged again. Then he stuffed it under his buttocks and continued to look at the shadow on the stone wall. The shadow on the stone wall was imprinted by the Buddha nature of the previous generation of eminent monks. It was indeed a very magical dharma. If it was in the temples of the human world, it would definitely be worshipped by countless believers of the Buddhism sect. But what did it have to do with him? Ninkei did not know why the shadow on the stone wall was so attractive to him. His eyes fell on it, and he did not want to look away. He always felt that there were countless mysteries waiting for him to discover. He was tired of standing, so he sat down. After sitting and watching for a long time, he was also a little tired, so he hugged his knees and rested his head on them. After a while, he changed his posture again. He rested his chin on his hand and looked at the stone wall quietly. He was like a child in the countryside watching a social play, watching it with relish. During the process of looking at the wall, Ninkei did not sit cross-legged, did not sit on the lotus seat, did not make the emblematic gesture, and did not meditate. He looked very casual and seemed to be in a daze. But in fact, he sat on the lotus in his sense of perception and made the emblematic gesture. The Dharma that he had seen in the Lang Temple and learned from Master Chishan kept floating in his mind, but he did not meditate. After a long time, Sang Sang returned to the dark cave. She had gone to the 3 halls of the Xiankong Temple for a long time, but still did not find that person. Seeing Ninkei in a daze, her eyes slightly brightened, but she did not say anything. She turned around and walked out of the cave again. This time, she went to the commandment yard on the west peak. There were countless towering ancient trees in the west peak, but there was still no trace of Buddha. Her expression became more and more serious. She stood on the twisted roots of the ancient trees that protruded out of the cliff, looking at the sun in the sky silently. If heaven's calculation could not be calculated, then there was no mystery of heaven. Then where should the heart of heaven fall? Sang Sang returned to the remote cliff platform again, walked into the dilapidated temple, and came behind Ning Quebec. Ning Ke was still in a daze while looking at the shadow on the stone wall. Sang Sang left again. This time, she went to the east peak full of rugged rocks, but still found nothing. She stood among the rocks and looked at the sun in the sky, silently. She returned to the old temple cave again. Ning Ke was still facing the wall. She left again, and came back again. She had done this countless times. Although she was Hao Yin, she felt a little tired and puzzled. Heaven's calculation could not be calculated, and the mystery of heaven could not be seen. Why did the heart of heaven always fall on this guy's side? Could it be that she could not leave him? Thinking of this possibility, Sang Sang looked at Ning Ke's back with infinite hatred and irritation in her eyes. She wanted to kill him and then suppress him to the deepest part of the earth. But she could not kill him after all. She still wanted to be herself. So she could only wave her sleeves and leave the cave again to continue her search. Ning Ke did not know that Sang Sang had once wanted to kill him, and he almost died. He was still looking at the shadow on the stone wall with his chin in his hand. His expression kept changing, sometimes solemn and sometimes silly. A day passed like this. When the sun set, a white flower bloomed on the unknown green tree by the cliff. It only bloomed for a moment, then left the branch and fell to the ground. The white flower fell on the cliff and touched the dust. It was blown up by the breeze outside the cliff, as if it was slowly lifted by a pair of invisible hands. It floated into the dilapidated temple door, drifted to the stone wall in the cave, and gently fell on Ning Ke's shoulder. Ning Ke reached out to pick the small white flower off his shoulder. He gently pinched the delicate flower handle with his fingers, looked at the shadow on the stone wall, and said with a smile, "So you used to learn Buddhism here." With this sentence, the pieces of consciousness in the deepest part of his sense of perception, which had been sleeping for many years, suddenly lit up and then gradually faded, like the most dazzling brilliance of an old pearl. At dusk, the bell of Xiankong Temple rang again, echoing in every corner of the peak. Ning Ke woke up and bowed to the shadow on the stone wall. Then he got up and walked out of the cave to the green tree by the cliff. He calmly looked at the scenery of the Buddha land in front of him. This old temple was the old residence of Lotus. When Lotus studied Buddhism in Xiankong Temple, he sat on the wall for several years in the cave, leaving his shadow and the legend of the front gate of Buddhism in the human world. In the front gate of Devil's Doctrine, he inherited the mantle of youngest uncle and everything of Lotus. Before Lotus died, he once said to him, "You have joined the devil. If you want to cultivate the Devil's Doctrine, you must first cultivate Buddhism. Then please walk bravely into the darkness. Although you have little chance of success and may die as soon as you start on the road, I still wish you well and curse you." Ning Ke had long forgotten this. Although he had cultivated Buddhism with Master Qishan in Lang Temple, it was to cure Sang Sang. He had never actively studied Buddhism. It was not until today, when he came to Xiankong Temple and meditated for a whole day in front of the shadow on the stone wall, that he remembered the words and Lotus's instructions and really made up for this very important lesson. After facing the wall for a day, Ning Ke had gained a lot. Although there was no change on the surface, and his cultivation state was still in the knowing destiny state, he had planted a Bodhi seed in his heart. Perhaps the Bodhi seed would germinate and break out of the soil at any time. Eventually, it would grow green and cover the eyes of heaven and Buddha. In the twilight, Sang Sang returned to the edge of the cliff. Ning Ke said, "It seems that you still haven't found Buddha." Sang Sang said, "You haven't found him either." Ning Ke said, "I forgot to find senior brother." Sang Sang asked, "What are you doing?" Ning Ke said, "I'm looking at it." Sang Sang said indifferently, "What's there to look at in the Buddhist psyche left by an old monk?" Ning Ke walked to her and put the small white flower in her hair. He said happily, "It's really beautiful." The second chapter is really well written. If Ning Ke becomes a heart thief, he really has the potential. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 943. At times like this, smart girls usually wouldn't speak. They would just lower their heads shyly. Smarter girls would probably take the opportunity to snuggle into a man's arms. Only overly smart girls would ask that question. Do you mean the flowers are prettier? Oh, am I prettier? Sang Sang would not ask such a question. She did not show any shyness on her face, nor would she snuggle into Ning Kei's arms. She acted as if she had heard nothing and went straight to the other side of the cliff yard. Ning Kei was a little disappointed, but he felt very satisfied and happy when he saw the small white flower on her temple gently trembling in the evening wind and noticed that she did not want to take it off. Have you seen my second brother? He pushed away the dense green vines and chased after Sang Sang to ask. In his opinion, second brother should be meditating on the Dharma on the peak or somewhere in the commandment yard. Sang Sang should have seen him when she was looking for Buddha. Sang Sang did not turn around. She kept walking with her hands behind her back and said, "Idiot." Ning Kei could not remember how many times she had called him an idiot. His anger had long turned into numbness. He shook his head helplessly and realized that he was really an idiot when he saw the scene below the peak. As dusk fell, the giant sinkhole surrounded by the cliff became extremely dark. Only the field near the peak could be vaguely seen because of the reflection of the yellow temple roof. There were countless black spots moving slowly in the field below the peak, looking like diligent ants. Ning Kei knew that they were the farmers that he and Sang Sang had seen before. That year at the edge of the giant sinkhole, Ning Kei estimated that there were more than 1,000 monks in Xiankong Temple and at least 100,000 people living in the field to maintain this Buddhist country. Now that he came to the Xiankong Temple, he found that there were countless temples on this mountain, and the number of monks they supported was far beyond his imagination. There were at least tens of thousands of monks, which meant that there were millions of farmers who had been living in the dark underground world for generations. In order to maintain the existence of Xiankong Temple, the monks had to drive these farmers like livestock. In this sense, those farmers were more like serfs that had long been abolished in the Central Plains. The more difficult the place was, the stricter the social class was. Ning Kei looked at the black spots moving slowly at the foot of the mountain and understood that those serfs must be carrying out daily offerings to the monks. His expression gradually became solemn, as if he had seen those tragic scenes that he had not really seen. At that time, he and Sang Sang only took a glance at Xiankong Temple and left quietly. At that time, he thought that if he was a man of great wisdom and courage, he might climb down the cliff and secretly go to the miserable world under the clouds to launch a rebellion among the serfs and overthrow the deformed Xiankong Temple. But he was not. Someone was wise and brave. That person was naturally second senior brother Jun Mo left Chong and traveled thousands of miles to Xiankong Temple to cultivate Buddhism. However, with his temperament, how could he cultivate Buddhism after seeing the real situation of Xiankong Temple? Practicing Buddhism was not worshiping Buddha. Jun Mo saw that the world was so miserable. Not to mention kowtowing in front of Buddha, he would definitely draw his sword in anger and kill the monks and Buddha in the temple first. Ning Kei searched for Jun Mo in the Xiankong Temple. No wonder Sang Sang called him an idiot. Senior brother must be down there. He looked at the gradually darkening, miserable world at the foot of the mountain and said, "I'm going there to see him. Do you want to go with me?" Sang Sang came to Xiankong Temple to find Buddha. He thought that she would not be willing to spend time with him to find second senior brother, but he did not expect that she would agree. Climbing the peak last night and descending the mountain tonight, the yellow temples and palaces along the way were naturally different because of their different moods. In Ning Kei's eyes, there was no difference between them and the white bone mountain in the front gate of Devil's Doctrine. When he climbed the mountain last night, he saw the magnificent and solemn temples and thought that it was natural for Xiankong Temple to be the holy land of Buddhism. But now he knew that it was not the case. Xiankong Temple was isolated from the world, but it could be so magnificent. It must have absorbed the marrow of the serfs at the foot of the mountain. The more magnificent the temple was, the more miserable the world under the mountain was. Walking down the giant peak and away from the ancient temple of Buddha land, they came to the real miserable world. The green and joyful field in his eyes yesterday now looked so gloomy in the night. The night could not completely blind Ning Kei's eyes. He and Sang Sang moved forward in silence, and his eyes slowly swept across the field. He saw fields with different kinds of rice, underground rivers with hot steam, and even a few mountains. But these mountains were too inconspicuous compared to the giant peak, just like mounds of earth. At the bend of the river, he saw the place where people panned for gold. He also saw many arms cut off by sharp weapons. Behind the hill, he saw gems and emeralds in the grass. He also saw the corpses that were eaten by vultures. Occasionally, he could hear the strange cries of birds. The field was not completely dark, and he could see many bonfires emitting light. Tents and yurts were scattered on the ground. Nobles who were as fat as pigs wore all kinds of gem necklaces, held wine utensils made of skulls, and stepped on girls' naked breasts with their muddy feet. No matter which tribe it was, there were always a lot of valiant men standing next to the nobles. Those men held whips and sharp knives in their hands. Sometimes the whips fell on the cows and sheep, but more often on the female slaves. The sharp knives were sometimes used to cut the mutton, but more often they were stabbed into the chests of the men or the fathers of the female slaves. Blood and wine mixed together. The nobles seemed so happy, while the cowardly and numb serfs could only keep kneeling in front of the temples on the mountain peaks, like useless ants. It was understandable that they were cowardly and numb. However, when those serfs used their hands to offer the most precious gold and silver and the most chaste daughters to the monks, they looked so happy. There were not many monks in the field, but they had a status that even the nobles could not imagine. They sat in the warm yurts, and their palms gently fell on the heads of their believers or on the girls who knelt beside them. The scene was a little weird. It was a mixture of holiness and obscenity, very mysterious but still dirty. Ning Kei looked at the tent in the distance and listened to the chanting and moaning coming from there. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and said, "It's really ugly." The small white flower in Song Song's hair gently trembled in the night wind. He looked at her and asked, "Why?" Ning Kei had a very deep understanding of the ugly and tragic side of the human world. He did not know how much he had seen since he was a child. However, he could not understand why such an extremely unstable social structure could last for so many years, and why people living here could endure for so many years and even seemed very happy. As I said, this is a well. Sang Sang looked at the cliff in the distant night sky and said, "They are like frogs in a well and can't see anything. When they see the monks on the mountain, they think they are real Buddhas, and Buddhas are the most deceptive." Ning Kei thought for a moment and said, "Second brother is right. All monks should die." Sang Sang said, "The academy has always only looked at heaven, not the human world." She did not show any sarcasm on her face, but Ning Kei knew what she wanted to say. However, even someone as unreasonable as him could not defend himself after seeing this miserable world. "You are right," he said, "but since second brother is here, the academy will definitely take care of it." Ning Kei and Sang Sang walked a little slowly because they wanted to see. They did not walk until the next morning. The morning light illuminated the Xiankong temple between the peaks, but they were still a long distance away from the cliff. The closer they were to the cliff and the farther they were from the peak where the Xiankong temple was located, the lower the temperature was, the poorer the crops were, and the more enslaved the serfs were, and the more miserable their lives were. The agricultural products in the field gradually became scarce, and the cold-resistant weeds gradually became lush. Cows and sheep with their long gray hair walked slowly in the meadow. There were piles of stones in the grass, and tattered banners were hanging on them. Ning Kei had seen some piles of stones and banners the day before yesterday, but he did not pay much attention to them. Now when he walked closer, he found the scattered black blood and a faint smell of blood on the stones. As they moved forward, he and Sang Sang saw more disabled serfs who had been tortured. Some had their tongues cut off, some had their ears cut off, and some had their calf bones smashed. They were in all kinds of miserable states. They looked so miserable and ugly that he couldn't bear to look at them anymore. Ning Kei knew that his senior brother must be in the most miserable place, so he knew that he was on the right path. Sang Sang could not find the Buddha, but it was not difficult to find someone. So he took him to the depths of the meadow. Cattle and sheep were scattered on the meadow, as beautiful as clouds, but the color was a little out of place. Not far from the sheep, there must be a shabby yurt. Behind the yurt, there was often a lake. The lake water was blue, salty, or sweet. A large area of wetland was formed naturally by the lake water, and the aquatic plants were extremely abundant. A little girl in a dirty old leather coat was waving a small whip to drive her 4 lambs. Ning Ke and Sang Sang looked at the little girl and subconsciously thought of Tang shouting. It was probably the first time for the little girl to see strangers, but she was not afraid at all. She smiled and waved to them. The smile on her dark face was so clean, and her teeth were so white that it made people dizzy. Ning Ke looked at her and smiled. The little girl drove the 4 lambs to them. Without saying anything, she took Ning Ke's hand and led him and Sang Sang to the yurt, meaning that they would be guests. This field was deep underground, isolated from the world, and outsiders could not find it. But it was still the human world. Ning Ke thought of the cruel scenes he had seen that night, and then looked at the little girl holding his hand. Suddenly, he thought of the ruined city of Wei and the young men and women dancing around the bonfire outside the city of Wei. Hell and heaven were both in the human world. Sang Sang said, "Ignorance is naivety, and naivety is cruelty. Can't you see through it?" Ning Ke said, "Even so, there is no need to say it." At this moment, he saw the scene on the other side of the lake. There was a crowd of people kneeling on the ground, surrounding a monk. The monk was wearing a dirty khaki robe, and the sleeve of his right arm kept swinging in the wind. If it was someone else, it would be very ugly. But with his solemn and elegant demeanor, it looked so proper, and no one could find any fault with it. Chapter 3, and before 12 o'clock, come out, Chapter 4. Hell and heaven are both in the human world. This is the lyric of Do Wei's song, which was used when Lotus was born. A few days ago, a reader at me on Weibo. I saw it, but I didn't reply. Then, I suddenly realized that it was a good use here. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 944. In the field under the Shinkong Temple, the monks were all punished by the Commandment Hall, so they naturally had no patience for their followers. Their cruelty was even more terrible than that of the nobles and the tribes. The monk by the lake was able to make his followers kneel so close to him, and he did not frown because of the bad smell on them. He looked extremely calm and natural. The monk was so extraordinary that he was Junemo separated by the lake. The wind was a little strong. Ning Ke listened casually and did not hear what second brother was saying. He took the little girl's hand and walked over there, gradually quickening his pace. At this moment, the sound of galloping horses could be heard from the side of the meadow. A dozen or so strong men galloped over on fine horses, led by a man dressed in fur. He waved the whip in his hand as he looked at the nomads kneeling on the ground and scolded them sternly, probably telling them to disperse. The herdsmen got up in fear and wanted to disperse, but they were worried that the guru they had painstakingly invited would be hurt by the whip. They hurriedly waved their hands and explained to the man on the horse. "Lord Bai, this is..." Before he could finish speaking, the whip lashed down fiercely and landed on an old herdsman's shoulder, leaving a bloody gash. This was only because the man was not sitting properly. Otherwise, if the whip had landed, the old herdsman's shoulder would have been torn off. How vicious was this man? The men who followed the nobles all drew out their swords from their saddles and shouted at the herdsmen by the lake. They did not advance and brandished their swords to threaten the herdsmen by the lake. Some even urged their horses to drive them away. The nobles looked at Jun and Mo, who was surrounded by the herdsmen, and shouted, "The living Buddha said that he is an evil man from the foreign sect, not a guru at all. Get out of the way." The herdsmen looked at the nobles in horror, but they did not get out of the way. They were not brave enough to disobey Lord Bai's order, but they firmly believed that Jun Mo was the guru. Otherwise, how could he be so merciful to them? Therefore, They were very afraid that Lord Bai would be punished by Buddha if he hurt the guru. The nobles also knew that it was impossible to explain to these stupid untouchables. He raised the whip in his hand and pointed at Junimo, saying, "Tie this cripple up." The living Buddha said that he would be burned to death. The men answered in unison and urged their horses to rush to the lake. The swords in their hands reflected the sunlight and looked extremely sharp. The herdsmen were frightened and fled in all directions. Seeing that the monk in yellow was about to be knocked down, the nobles' eyes became cruel. The living Buddha had indeed said to capture this evil person alive and then burn him to death. However, this evil person actually dared to incite his own slave to rebel. Before he was burned to death, no matter what, he had to suffer. Should he cut off his ear, or cut off his remaining left arm, or peel off the skin of his face? Just as he was thinking about this, the nobleman suddenly felt a gust of cold wind behind his head. How could he dodge in time? He felt a chill on his ear, and then his left shoulder lightened. Then he felt something wet on his face. Waves appeared in the blue lake, as if a strange beast was coming ashore. A black shadow broke through the waves, whistling through the air, and finally landed in the hands of the monk in yellow. It was a square and thick iron sword. Junimo waved the sword, and more than 10 heads flew into the air. More than 10 streams of blood sprayed from the necks of the men to the sky, as if to wash away the sinful sky. Although the iron sword was wide and thick, the person who used the sword never knew the meaning of it. He only knew the principle of righteousness. There was no intense scene, not even a battle. Junimo just waved the sword, and everything was over. The nobles looked at this scene, and his face turned pale. He opened his mouth for a long time, unable to speak. Then he gradually felt the pain. He reached out to touch his face and found that it was covered in blood. The iron sword broke through the lake and landed in Junimo's hand. It happened to pass by the side of the noble's horse. With just a brush, the nobles lost an ear, an arm, and a piece of flesh was cut off from his face. The noble's face was covered in blood, and his ear and arm were cut off. He looked extremely miserable. When he found all this, he was even more painful and frightened, and almost fainted. As a man who had lived in such a harsh environment, he managed to keep himself from falling off the horse. But when he looked at Junimo by the lake, his eyes were filled with fear. The nobles did not expect that this evil man was so powerful. Without hesitation, he pulled the reins with his remaining arm and rode back to his tribe. He did not dare to look back or say anything cruel, so that the evil man would wait for him to come back for revenge. Of course, he would definitely come back for revenge, and then he would kill all the people here. The herdsmen who had fled in all directions gradually came back. Looking at the dozens of corpses by the lake and the horses who were a little confused because they had lost their owners, their eyes were also very confused. Living in the cruel underground world, they had seen many bloody scenes, and even more brutal ones. But they had never imagined that the most powerful butchers of Lord Bai would one day be killed in such a simple way. Looking at the yellow-robed monk by the lake, the herdsmen knelt again. Their faces were full of awe and fear, and there was a faint uneasiness on their faces. They did not know what to do next. The old herdsman walked up to Junimo and knelt down. He kissed the ground in front of Junimo's shoes and said in a trembling voice, "Great and merciful Guru, please leave quickly." Junimo looked at the top of his head expressionlessly and said, "Because I will implicate you if I stay." "No." The old herdsman raised his head. His dark face was full of wrinkles, and the wrinkles were full of painful tears. He said, "If you have time, you will definitely become the most powerful guru, or even the living Buddha. But although you are powerful now, you are still not enough. As for us, we will definitely die. Please don't worry." Junimo's expression gradually became gentle. He said, "That man will come with countless swords and arrows, and even the living Buddha you mentioned. So I have to stay here." The old herdsman said in a trembling voice, "Even if you can kill all the warriors of Lord Bai, or even defeat the living Buddha, you will anger the Buddha on the holy mountain." The Buddha. Junimo looked at the extremely high mountain in the distance, and said expressionlessly, "In your eyes, the holy mountain is very high. But if you have a chance to walk on the ground, you will know that the mountain is actually very short. From the ground, it is just an inconspicuous little mound." Hearing this, the lakeside suddenly became very quiet. Only the sound of the fish swimming in the lake, frightened by the iron sword, could be heard. The herdsmen looked very confused. They had never heard such words. They did not know what the ground was. Was the field they were standing on not the ground? Was there another ground? Where's that ground? Why did the holy mountain look like a little mound when standing on that ground? No, how could the holy mountain be a little mound? A clear and childish voice broke the silence. Ning-Ke held the little girl's hand and asked curiously, "Master, where's the ground you mentioned?" The herdsmen by the lakeside looked very frightened. In their opinion, the little girl's question should not be asked because it meant blasphemy to the holy mountain and the Buddha. A middle-aged woman, who was probably the little girl's mother, was so scared that her face turned pale. She wanted to drag her back and beat her, but she found that her daughter was holding a stranger's hand, so she did not dare to do so. Junimo saw Ning-Ke and Sang-Sang. He was slightly stunned and then ignored them. He said to the little girl, "We are now underground, and the ground is above." He pointed behind him and said, "Climb up this cliff, and you will arrive at the real ground." Behind him was an extremely high and steep cliff. For countless years, it was this cliff that imprisoned countless generations of serfs and herdsmen underground. In Song Song's words, it was the wall of a well, but in fact, it was the wall of a prison. The herdsmen followed his finger and looked at the cliff, but they could not see the end. It was often surrounded by clouds and mist. They thought that this cliff was almost as high as the holy mountain. How could they climb up? For countless years, no one had ever climbed up this cliff. In the teachings of the monks, this idea gradually became an act of blasphemy to the Buddha. Who dared to try? The herdsmen looked at the cliff and suddenly came to their senses. They found that they really wanted to see what the ground above the cliff was. They could not help but feel guilty and kept kowtowing. Junimo looked at the herdsmen and asked, "Don't you want to know what is above?" No one answered him. The old herdsman said piously, "Master, that place is the divine kingdom of Buddha. How can we sinful mortals go there?" Junimo ignored him and looked at the crowd, hoping to hear a different answer. However, after a long time, the lakeside was still quiet. He looked a little tired and a little disappointed. At this moment, the little girl who was holding Ning-Ke's hand spoke. Maybe it was because Ning-Ke's warm hands gave the little girl a lot of courage. She said softly in a clear voice, "I want to go up and have a look." Countless people looked at the little girl. Her mother even fainted. The little girl lowered her head, looking a little uneasy and scared. Ning-Ke gently squeezed her hand and comforted her, "Don't be afraid." The little girl raised her head bravely. She pointed to somewhere in the middle of the cliff and said, "I not only want to go up, but I really went up. Although I didn't climb very high, I climbed there. From there, I can see further. I saw the lambs that ran to the Golden Lake. Then I found them. Then I saw a snow lotus on the cliff." The little girl said, while looking at the crowd. The herdsmen by the lake looked up in shock. They followed the little girl's thin hand to look at the cliff and found that it was not high. They could really climb up. How could there be a snow lotus there? No matter how high the cliff is, as long as you dare to climb, you can climb to the top one day. But if you don't dare to climb, how can you see the snow lotus no matter how close it is? Junimo looked at the cliff and said calmly, "Chapter 4, there's more today. I'll say it later because I'm hungry and haven't had dinner. Chapter 5 will be about 1 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 9:45. But it's the divine kingdom of Buddha on the cliff. The herdsman by the lake said in a trembling voice. The hope and curiosity in their eyes were replaced by awe and uneasiness. But some emotions could never be erased once they appeared. "I came from the ground, and so did the two of them. If the ground is the divine kingdom of Buddha, then you can regard us as the messengers of Buddha." Junimo looked at the herdsman and said calmly, He began to tell the story in the Buddhist scriptures. It was a perfect nirvana without snowstorms or bullying by nobles. In that world, there were heavenly maids scattering flowers, countless colored glazes, and spring all year round. It was the most beautiful place in humans' imagination. Sang Sang looked at that place and suddenly said, "The people from the academy are really crazy." Ning Ke found that even a gentleman like second brother would lie. He sighed and said, "Only the truly merciful people would make such a sacrifice." Sang Sang said, "Jun Mo should learn from you when it comes to deceiving people." He said helplessly, "Can there be a day when you won't say bad things about me?" Song Song's answer was concise. It was not that she couldn't, but she said why. Jun Mo's voice kept echoing by the lake like the warmest spring breeze. The herdsmen were fascinated and had long forgotten their previous fear and uneasiness. After the preaching, the herdsmen all knelt and bowed to Ning Ke and then dispersed. Jun Mo walked to Ning Ke and patted him on the shoulder. Then he looked at Sang Sang and asked, "Are you looking for a way back?" Not everyone could be so natural in front of Hao Yin. The abbey dean couldn't do it. The chief monk of scripture couldn't do it. The drunkard and the butcher couldn't do it. And even eldest brother couldn't do it. Jun Mo could do it because he had never been afraid of death. He only respected the headmaster, the youngest uncle, and the eldest brother. So he was naturally fearless and regarded Hao Yin as ordinary. And many years ago, on the nameless mountain in the north of Chang, and he decided to treat Sang Sang as a little girl who deserved to be pitied when he saw her kneeling by the cliff and holding the ashes in her hands. Sang Sang had a similar feeling after leaving the divine halls of West Hill, especially after entering the Tang territory. But this was the first time she saw someone treat her like an ordinary person except for Ning Quebec. She frowned slightly, not knowing if she should be angry or calm. Jun Mo ignored what she was thinking and continued. "What's wrong with staying in the human world? Teacher said that you would be very pitiful, and now it seems that it is indeed so." Sang Sang was really angry. She had felt Ning Ke's pity in the West Hill Divine Palace and Mo Shanshan's pity by the Ink Lake in the Great River Kingdom. At this time, she heard from Jun Mo that the headmaster also felt sorry for her, and she could not help but be angry. Why would Hao Yin need the pity of mortals? All humans, including the headmaster of the academy, have been defeated by me. Why do you have to pity me? She reached out to Jun Mo. Jun Mo raised his eyebrows and tightened his grip on the iron sword. This iron sword could shatter the Buddha statue in Lank, sweep away thousands of soldiers in front of the Verdant Canyon, make Yisu confused, and make Lu Bai retreat, but it could not stop this hand. Song Song's hand fell on Jun Mo's face. Since she had made her move, she didn't do anything else. She looked at Jun Mo quietly, and the atmosphere by the lake became a little strange. Ning Ke had never understood why she would accompany him to find second brother instead of looking for Buddha. Looking at this scene, he realized that there was indeed something hidden in it. Song Song's hand began to move on Jun Mo's face, sliding over his eyebrows, his nose, and his lips. Ning Ke was stunned in thought. "What are you doing?" "This is your eldest uncle." As her husband, when he saw her touching Jun Mo's face, jealousy welled up in his heart, and he was very angry. Jun Mo's monk robe rose with the wind, and so did his anger. The atmosphere suddenly became extremely tense, and the situation was on the verge of exploding. At this time, Ning Ke suddenly fell forward and hugged Jun Mo's thigh, begging, "Senior brother, please bear with it a little longer. You can't beat her." A tragic drama between heaven and man was about to be staged, but it was suddenly disrupted by this uninvited guest. Jun Mo's eyebrows slightly trembled, and he wanted to kick him away. Song Song's hand finally left Jun Mo's face. She turned around and walked to a very small tent by the lake. She slightly frowned and thought, "It's not him either. Where is Buddha hiding? Why can't I find him?" She knew that the tent was Jun Mo's residence. She walked to the tent, unceremoniously lifted the curtain, and was about to walk in. But before she entered, she thought of one thing. She looked back at Jun Mo and said, "I grant you immortality." Junimo said without thinking. We'll talk about it when you're truly immortal. Since Sang Sang came to the human world, she had granted immortality to many people. They all had different reactions. The drunkard and the butcher were overjoyed. Tang Xiaodang thought it was too sudden and suggested that she buy the food for the evening first. Mrs. Zeng just hugged her and cried, and didn't understand what she said. Ning Ke simply chose to refuse. Most of the time, she didn't hear what she wanted. But today, Junimo gave her a very unexpected answer, which made her feel very puzzled. It's up to you. She stood outside the tent and thought for a while. Then she said and walked in. Looking at the tent, Ning Ke felt very helpless and said, You really sold immortality like cabbages, and it was a big sale. But the method was so rough that no one would buy it no matter how cheap it was. Junimo asked, What is she doing? Ning Ke said, Senior brother, you used to treat her very well, so she wants to return the favor. Junimo was a very smart person. He only needed to hear this sentence to understand what Haotian meant. He said, She actually wants to use this method to cut off her relationship with the human world. What an idiot. Ning Ke sighed and said, I also think she is an idiot. Junimo said, It seems that she hasn't found a way to return to the divine kingdom. That's why she's so mischievous. What about you? Have you found a way to let her stay in the human world? Ning Ke remembered the sentence that he thought of before Chong, and said, Not yet. I want to come to Xiankong Temple to see if I could get any inspiration. But now it seems that it is meaningless. There could be a perfect method in the world that would not betray Chong and not betray the human world. This method must be far more profound than the Buddhist Dharma. Junimo said, I've been watching the moon these days. The headmaster seems to be struggling. If she goes back, the human world will definitely be defeated. So, younger brother, you have to work harder. Ning Ke said after a moment of silence. If that day really comes, we have to use the last method. Junimo said, I don't want to go against human relations. Ning Ke said, Senior brother is a gentleman, but I am not. Junimo looked at the iron sword in his hand and said after thinking, I still don't think it is right. Ning Ke didn't want to continue this topic and said, Senior brother, you have been in Xiankong Temple for some time. What new things have you encountered? Junimo raised the iron sword in his hand and pointed to the majestic mountain in the distance. He said, In such a dirty place, what else can there be except dirty people and things? Ning Ke thought that his question was indeed a bit stupid. With second brother's temperament, he would not be interested in visiting the ancient times. He said, Senior brother, it is fun to preach and kill people in the wilderness. Junimo shook his head and said, You came at the right time. I just started killing people today. I have been telling stories from the Buddhist scriptures to the herdsmen and serfs for the past few days. Ning Ke found it a bit hard to understand. He thought that senior brother hated the Buddhism sect and monks the most. Even if he had never read the Buddhist scriptures, how could he preach to the devout believers of the Buddhism sect? Junimo said, I read some Buddhist scriptures in the back of the mountain and some more on the journey. These herdsmen can't even read the words. It is more effective to preach some simple stories. Ning Ke praised, Senior brother, you are so kind. You must have some enlightenment when you preach. Junimo said indifferently, In my opinion, the Buddhist scriptures are all lies. What enlightenment can there be? Ning Ke was puzzled. The people here have lived underground for generations and worshipped the Xiankong Temple with their flesh and blood. However, they have never heard of Buddhism. So when I preached, they were wild with joy and regarded me as a real guru. Junimo looked at the gradually cold and gloomy wilderness, and his voice gradually became cold. He said, The Buddhism sect claims to deliver all living beings from suffering, but treats them as pigs and dogs. The Buddhism sect claims that there are endless mysteries in the Buddhist scriptures, but they don't even let their believers read them. Then what is the difference between the Buddhist scriptures and waste paper? What is the difference between them and liars? Ning Ke asked, Senior brother, what are you going to do next? Junimo said, I came here to meditate and cultivate Buddhism. Who would have thought that the Buddha is so hateful? How can I meditate after seeing the 3,000 miserable worlds? These bald donkeys all deserve to die. Ning-Ke reminded him, Seven Sisters said that we can't use bald donkeys to scold people. Jun-Mo stroked his new dark hair and said, since there is new hair, we can scold them. Ning-Ke praised, that makes sense. Jun-Mo looked at the crescent moon in the night sky and said, the headmaster is fighting with Hao Yin. As his disciple, I should serve him. But my cultivation is too low and I can't ascend to heaven or defeat her. So I can only do what the academy should do in the human world. Let's get rid of the Xiankong temple first. Ning-Ke praised again. Senior brother is really merciful. Jun-Mo turned to look at him and said, since I started killing people today, I will kill people every day. I will kill more and more people. I can only ignore your matter for the time being. In the previous battle by the lake, the nobleman left after cutting off his ear, arm, and face. Ning-Ke knew that it was his senior brother's arrangement. Otherwise, the nobleman would definitely die. His purpose was naturally to kill more people tomorrow. Killing those noblemen will definitely attract the monk soldiers. Killing the monk soldiers will attract the guru and living Buddha. Senior brother's sword shakes the world, and eventually the Xiankong temple will be alerted. I am afraid that we can't kill them all. Ning-Ke was a little worried. I told those herdsmen that no matter how high the cliff is, as long as you are willing to climb it, you will climb to the top one day. The same goes for killing people. As long as you keep killing, there will be a day when you can kill them all. Jun-Mo gazed at the majestic peak in the darkness of the night and said, look at the pitch-black mountain over there. I'll kill all the dogs underground first, then I'll rush over and kill all the bald donkeys in the temple. Then I'll burn down the mountain. Ning-Ke praised again. Cultivating Buddhism means killing Buddha. Senior brother, you are so merciful. Jun-Mo said, wrong. Killing Buddha is cultivating Buddhism. Ning-Ke said, maybe this is the real, merciful Buddhism. Jun-Mo said, yes. Even if Buddha was reborn and stood in front of me, I would still say the same thing. Ning-Ke was silent for a moment and said, maybe Buddha is still alive. Don't be naughty. He said, of course, even if Buddha is still alive, I will kill him with a sword. Killing Buddha when encountering Buddha, this was the Buddha that Jun-Mo cultivated. Tears welled up in my eyes. I can't believe I wrote 5 chapters. Thank you for not believing me. Finally, I sincerely ask you to vote for me. The book review section needs this very much. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please Kamachidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 946. Ning-Ke asked, what if I can't kill him? Jun-Mo said, then I'll die. He said it calmly, but Ning-Ke was shocked. After a long silence, he said again, senior brother, Buddha might still be alive. Jun-Mo didn't believe it at all. He scolded seriously, you fool. Buddha has already reached nirvana. If he is still alive, how could Headmaster and Hao Yin not know? Ning-Ke sighed and said, she really doesn't know whether Buddha is alive or not. Otherwise, why would she come to Xiankong Temple? After a moment of silence, Jun-Mo said, then let's find him first. When they returned to the small tent by the lake, Sang-Sang was sleeping. It turned out that Hao Yin felt sleepy. Hearing footsteps, she opened her eyes and looked at Ning Quebec. She said, I'll spare his life and cut off this mortal bond. Jun-Mo said, before the Verdant Canyon, I said that I don't need heaven to spare my life. Ning-Ke said earnestly, you can't cut off your mortal bond just because you want to. Can you be reasonable? Sang-Sang sat up and looked at Jun-Mo. She said, I don't understand. If Buddha wants to kill me, it should be what the Academy wants to see the most. Why are you on my side? She was Hao Yin, so she could note Jun-Mo's preference from his expression. She didn't mention Ning-Ke's position because she was used to Ning-Ke's following. Jun-Mo said calmly, shameless. Shameless meant being on the same side as him. Ning-Ke's answer was more direct. He said, the Academy can't afford to lose that person. After leaving the lake and meadow in front of the cliff, Ning-Ke and Sang-Sang walked around in the field underground, try to find traces of Buddha being alive or dead. Sometimes when they were grilling fish by the lake, he would wonder what second brother was doing now. Was he killing nobles and soldier monks with the iron sword? Or was he arguing with those unreasonable living Buddhas? In the next few decades, Jun Mo would hold the iron sword and keep fighting in this miserable world. The Buddhist land, which had been silent for countless years, would be stirred up. The Xiankong Temple, which enslaved millions of serfs, would probably start to tremble because of fear. Thinking of those images, even someone as cold-blooded as him felt a little emotional. He wished he could join hands with his senior brother. But now he had more important things to do. Even if he finished the deal with Buddha and Hao Ian, he still had to return to Chang and to do the big sale in the human world. The journey to find the Buddha continued. Ning Ke and Sang Sang walked through the vast field at the bottom of the giant sinkhole, but still found no clues. The two became more and more silent. The unknown was unsettling, especially for those who were omniscient. She walked through the wilderness, returned, and climbed the mountain again. She walked back and forth between the numerous temples between the forest cliffs. She meditated in front of the solemn Buddha statues and stood at the edge of the cliff, staring at the sky in a daze. On the west peak, in the main hall of the commandment yard, they stood among the towering old trees, listening to the sound of the board falling heavily on the monks. On the east peak, they stood in the shadow of the cliff rocks, watching the warrior monks stomping on the ground. In the Mahavira Hall at the top of the peak, they saw Qin Yin, who was meditating. In the hut behind the hall, they saw a thin old monk who was cooking porridge, and then they saw an ancient bell. The Xiankong Temple between the peaks looked so solemn and peaceful, totally different from the world below the peak. Looking at these images, Ning Ke was very puzzled. The Buddhism sect claimed to be merciful. How could they meditate on the peak while the common people suffered under the peak? How could they meditate while sitting on the peak and thinking about the people under the peak? In the yellow temple on the cliff platform below the peak, Ning Ke saw an acquaintance. It was Master Huang Yang, who left Chang and returned to the Xiankong Temple to ask Buddha again. At that time, Sang Sang was elsewhere, so Huang Yang only saw him. Master Huang Yang was a little surprised. Ning Ke briefly told him what had happened these days, and then the master realized that so many things had happened in the world. He said, "You'd better leave as soon as possible." Ning Ke slightly frowned and asked, "What's wrong with the Xiankong Temple?" Master Huang Yang shook his head and said, "I don't know what's wrong, so there should be something." Master Huang Yang was the younger brother of the emperor of the Tang Empire, and his status in the secular world was extremely noble, so he was naturally treated with courtesy in the Xiankong Temple. However, these days, the Xiankong Temple was still worshipping him, but no monk came to visit him. It gave people a feeling that the Xiankong Temple was deliberately isolating him, which made him a little vigilant. The moment he saw Ning Ke, the master knew where the trouble came from. In the wilderness, Sang Sang stomped the chief preaching monk into the solid ground, but the chief preaching monk did not die. It was not surprising that the Xiankong Temple knew the news of her and Ning Ke's arrival. Ning Ke was not worried. As the saying goes, with Hao Hian in one's arms, no one could defeat him. Master Huang Yang knew what he was thinking, but he had a different idea. He untied the string of prayer beads on his wrist and handed it to him. With a solemn expression, he said, "Buddha is merciful, but there are times when thunder strikes." Hearing the words "Buddha is merciful" in the Xiankong Temple, Ning Ke subconsciously felt a little uncomfortable. He walked to the stone steps in front of the temple, pointed to the world under the peak covered by clouds, and said, "Is there mercy there?" Master Huang Yang knew that he had been walking in the world under the peak for a long time. He said, "Many years ago, the Buddha established the Buddha kingdom with great wishes and built countless yellow temples among the peaks. He also gathered countless sinful people to farm and graze here to support the monks. He hoped that the monks could be enlightened by the Dharma and wash away their sins." Ning Ke said, "It's all bullshit. Let's not talk about whether the mortals who were captured by the Buddha were really sinful. Even if they were, they had their own laws to deal with them. I'm just a cultivator. How could I be qualified to convict them? Even if those people were really sinful or even 10 generations of evildoers, what sins did their descendants have? Why do we have to live in this godforsaken place for generations? Master Huangyang had Buddha in his heart, so he couldn't agree with Ning Kei's accusation. But he also knew that there was no way to refute it. After a long silence, he said, "This life is the most bitter, but the next life may be the happiest." Ning Kei turned around on the stone steps and looked at the Buddha statue in the temple. He said, "No matter how happy the next life is, how can it be equal to countless generations of suffering? The Buddha you worship is really disgusting." Master Huangyang said, "Maybe it's wrong, but who dares to disobey the rules set by the Buddha?" Ning Kei said, "To cultivate the Buddha, you need to meditate. The monks sit among the peaks and enjoy the offerings of those slaves. Can you really meditate? Can you really meditate?" Master Huangyang said, "Most of the monks in the temple have never been to the foot of the peak in their lives." Ning Kei said, "But they are not fools. They know very well what the world under the peak is like. Besides, the Xiankong Temple is also going to enter the human world. Those monk soldiers who go to the human world, or powerhouses like you and Qin Yin, have to pass through the field to get out of the giant sinkhole. How can you ignore those poor people?" Master Huangyang said, "What you said makes sense. The Xiankong Temple has been passed down for countless years. Naturally, they're really merciful eminent monks. Even if they violate the commandments of the Buddha, they want to make changes. But they all fail. What makes those eminent monks most confused is that when they try to make changes, the people under the peak become at a loss, as if suffering has become the dependence of their lives." Ning Kei said, "Faith is an addiction. If you want to get rid of it, it's inevitable that you will feel pain at the beginning. But how can you just let it go just because of temporary pain?" Master Huangyang said, "But if the Buddha land starts to collapse, how can you do anything?" Ning Kei said, "Why should we care about this damn place if it collapses?" Master Huangyang shook his head helplessly. He thought that Ning Kei, as a person outside the world, was right to think so. But how could the monks in the temple, as the disciples of the Buddha, watch the Buddha land being destroyed? Ning Kei said again, "If those eminent monks are really merciful, how can they bear it?" Master Huangyang said, "They can't bear it, but they can't do anything about it. So they can only leave." Ning Kei said, "So you left the Xiankong Temple and returned to Chang'an?" Master Huangyang said, "Yes, there are many monks like me who left the Xiankong Temple. When Master Qishan was young, he read all the Buddhist scriptures and understood all the Dharma. He was regarded as the only successor by the chief monk of the Xiankong Temple at that time. However, he couldn't bear to see the suffering of the people under the peak, so he finally broke the mountain gate and went to the Lang Temple." Ning Kei looked at the golden Buddha statue in the temple and thought of Master Qishan, who was sick from overwork in the cave on Hua Mountain. He was silent for a long time and said, "The heart of Buddha can't bear it." Ning Kei returned to the remote cliff yard, pulled out the green vines, and came to the tree in front of Lin Sheng's old residence. He didn't know what kind of tree it was. He only remembered that when he came here a few days ago, there was only one white flower on the whole tree. The wind blew it to his shoulder, and now it was inserted in Song Song's hair. Only a few days later, the tree was full of small white flowers. They spread their petals among the not dense green leaves, exuding a very pleasant floral fragrance and gradually drifting away with the breeze. Sang Sang walked to him. As she said a few days ago, no matter where Ning Kei was, she could easily find him. He would never let her get lost. The breeze blew between the cliffs. The green leaves and small white flowers trembled slightly. At a speed visible to the naked eye, the green leaves gradually thickened and the small white flowers gradually withered. The scene was extremely magical. Only the small white flower in Song Song's hair was still delicate and fresh. The green leaves thickened and the white flowers withered, but it didn't mean that it was desolate. It could also be a bumper harvest, because only when the flowers fell would they bear fruit. It didn't take long before the tree was full of green pears. Ning Kei didn't know that the tree by the cliff was actually a pear tree until then. He reached out to pick a green pear from the branch and found that it was much smaller than the common pears in the world. The surface of the pear was very light, tender, and juicy. Ninkei had seen this kind of green pear before, and so had Sang Sang. It was in the cave behind the Buddha statue on Wam Mountain several years ago. Master Chishan took out a green pear for Sang Sang to eat, and then Sang Sang gave him half. The green pear was really delicious. Looking at the green pear in his hand, Ninkei was a little hesitant and even vigilant. Last time, he and Sang Sang fell asleep after eating this green pear and were sucked into Buddha's chessboard. It would have been fine if it was any other time, but now he and Sang Sang were in Xiankong Temple. Ninkei had been wondering why the monks in Xiankong Temple were always so calm. Even if they couldn't find Sang Sang in him, they should be a little nervous. However, countless temples between the peaks were still as usual. Some were chanting, some were meditating, the commandment hall was still punishing the monks, and the warrior monks kept stamping the ground. The morning bell and evening drum were still refreshing. Xiankong Temple was too peaceful now. What were the monks in Xiankong Temple waiting for? Were they waiting for the Dharma that the Buddhism sect emphasized? Were they waiting for the moment when the Dharma came? Where was that moment? Was it on this green pear? Ninkei looked at the small green pear in his hand and frowned slightly. At this moment, a very melodious bell suddenly came from the peak. Could it clear the mind? Ninkei didn't think so. When he heard the bell, his heart suddenly tightened, as if it was held by an invisible hand and would be crushed in the next moment. The bell could not clear the mind, but it could only shock the mind. Ninkei's face instantly turned pale, and he almost crushed the small green pear in his hand in pain. Then he spat out a mouthful of dark red blood. He didn't know when her hand, which passed through the breeze between the cliffs, had grasped his hand. It was Sang Sang's hand. A pure and powerful divinity came from her hand and instantly occupied Ninkei's body and mind. It repaired his broken heart at an unimaginable speed. Ninkei got rid of the desperate situation and looked at the peak where the bell came from. His clothes were stained with blood, and his face was also stained with blood. There was still lingering fear in his eyes. The melodious bell came from the Grand Buddha's hall of Xiankong Temple, from the ancient bell that he and Sang Sang had seen before. However, he had never thought that the bell would be so terrifying. As his cultivation of the Great Spirit deepened, his body became as strong as steel. Ordinary knives and arrows couldn't even break his skin, let alone his heart, which was wrapped in layers of Great Spirit. However, a bell from Xiankong Temple had shattered his heart and almost killed him. Feeling the warmth in his hand, Ninkei once again felt the so-called "with Sang Sang in my hand, I have the world." No matter how terrifying the bell was, no matter how powerful Xiankong Temple was, as long as he held Sang Sang's hand tightly, he could still live even if she cut him into pieces. This was the conclusion that Ninkei had come to after countless blood and tears in the Divine Hall of Light and the U-Prison. He was very confident. Holding Sang Sang's hand, he was no longer afraid and could listen to the bell carefully. The sound of the bell reverberated among the cliffs and countless temples. It was so distant. Gradually, the chanting of sutras began to merge with the sound of the bell. In countless temples, countless monks were chanting Buddhist scriptures. The chanting was mixed together and buzzing. It was impossible to tell which Buddhist scripture they were chanting. Every Buddhist temple in the world started the day with the bell, which was the morning bell. When the morning bell rang, the monks woke up and began to chant devoutly. It was the morning class. When the Xiankong Temple woke up, the real Buddhist land left by Buddha in the human world also began to show its true appearance. A light of Buddha appeared on the cliff plateau and covered Sang Sang. Ninkei looked at this scene and felt cold all over. His heart seemed to stop beating, because he remembered a scene in the back hall of Lank Temple many years ago. This chapter is 4,000 words. There are more chapters today, but I'm a little tired and will write slowly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 947. Many years ago, in the autumn, a ray of Buddha's light penetrated the temple and fell on Sang Sang. That ray of Buddha's light was so merciful and so cold. In the Buddha's light, Song Song's face became paler, and her thin body became smaller. She looked at Ning Ke outside the Buddha's light and cried silently. From that moment on, she became the daughter of Yama and suffered endless pain and fear. Then she and Ning Ke began to be hunted by the whole human world. That ray of Buddha's light was undoubtedly the most fundamental turning point in Ning Ke and Song Song's lives. Everything that happened after that actually began from that. How could Ning Ke not remember it? At this time, looking at the Buddha's light on the cliff plateau and Sang Sang in the Buddha's light, he seemed to return to those years. The most painful and cold emotions all poured into his mind. No, he cried painfully. The Buddha's light appeared so suddenly that it connected the cliff plateau with the sky. Even Sang Sang couldn't tell whether it came from the sky or from the bottom of the cliff plateau. To be more precise, the Buddha's light connected the cliff plateau with the clouds. Countless layers of clouds floated over the mountain peak and completely covered the real blue sky. Sang Sang looked up at the depths of the Buddha's light with her hands behind her back. She looked calm. Her face was extremely pale, and now it was as white as snow under the bright light. Since she had to put her hands behind her back, she naturally didn't continue to hold Ning Ke's hand, because even she couldn't be too distracted in the face of the Buddha's light. However, at this moment, she heard Ning Ke's painful cry behind her. Even the Buddha's light didn't make her frown, but Ning Ke's voice made her frown slightly. She turned to look at Ning Ke and asked, "Don't what?" Ning Ke was affected by the Buddha's light and was vomiting blood in pain. Because he was worried about her safety, his face became extremely pale. He didn't expect that things would develop completely differently from what he had imagined. He looked at Sang Sang in the Buddha's light and didn't know what to say. Sang Sang didn't cry, vomit blood, fear, or call his name. Sang Sang was not as thin and pitiful as she used to be. Her figure was so tall that even the Buddha's light couldn't overshadow her. Only then did he remember that Sang Sang had grown up. She was now the omnipotent and omniscient Hao Yin. She was no longer the little handmaiden who could not leave him. She no longer needed his protection. On the contrary, she began to protect him. "It's nothing," Ning Ke said with a smile. Then he realized that he really didn't know what to say, so he vomited another mouthful of blood. Sang Sang was a little annoyed, thinking that humans were really troublesome creatures. One moment he was frightened, the next moment he was smiling. She actually couldn't figure out what was going on in his mind. Looking at the blood overflowing from the corner of Ning Ke's mouth, she thought she understood what he meant. With Ning Ke's state, without her holding his hand, he was naturally in great pain under the coercion of the Buddha's light. He said no, which meant he didn't want her to let go of his hand. As for what he said after that, it was naturally the boring pride of a male animal. "I'm busy." Sang Sang asked him, "Don't you know how to hold an umbrella?" In the past, it was she who vomited blood, but now it was his turn. Ning Ke was immersed in the sentimental mood brought by this change. Hearing this, he came to himself and hurriedly took out the big black umbrella and opened it. Since that autumn in Lang Temple, the big black umbrella had been tortured over these years and had long been tattered. Ning Ke took an old cloth from the jade tree and mended it, but it still looked extremely ugly. It was like a beggar's clothes with countless patches. Because it hadn't been washed for many years, it was full of black mud and didn't have the beautiful feeling of a blooming black lotus. Ning Ke didn't care. When he found that the black umbrella could really block the Buddha's light, he was very happy. He followed Song Song's gaze and looked into the depths of the Buddha's light, trying to find out where the enemy was. He was in a good mood, so was Sang Sang. Xiankong Temple finally responded. Instead of being afraid, she was very expectant. As long as there was a change, it would be good. The clue of Buddha's whereabouts might be in it. However, the next change was somewhat beyond their expectations. The sound of sutra echoing between the cliffs gradually became orderly. The loud and distant bell didn't cover the sound of sutra. It was more like the wind in a bellows, helping the sound of sutra to become louder and louder. With the change of the bell and the sound of sutra, the Buddha's light on the cliff yard also changed. The light became clearer and quieter, and the Buddha's power contained in it became more and more terrifying. Sang Sang still stood in the Buddha's light with her hands behind her back, looking calm and composed. Ning Kei's hand holding the handle of the umbrella trembled slightly. It became more and more difficult. He hurriedly stuffed the green pear into his sleeve and held the umbrella handle with both hands to barely support himself. At the peak, behind the Grand Hall of Xiankong Temple, there was no monk beside the ancient bell, but it swayed in the wind. The bell resounded through the entire giant peak and the field under the peak until it reached the cliff far away and then was knocked back. It kept repeating, making people intoxicated. On the stone steps in front of the Grand Hall, dozens of monks sat cross-legged. They put their palms together and closed their eyes to meditate. They kept chanting along with the rhythm of the bell, as if they were singing. Qin Yin sat at the forefront. He was a powerhouse of the Buddhism sect who had been practicing silent meditation for many years. Today, he read countless times more words than he had said in the past 10 years. The sound of sutra contained infinite power. The other dozens of monks were extremely old. Their white eyebrows seemed to hang down to their chests, and their palms put together were more wrinkled than the oldest tree's bark. It was obvious that they were elders in the Xiankong Temple. There were also people chanting at Grand Hall. Master Chi Mei, who was seriously injured by eldest brother in front of the Pamir Mountains, knelt in the most pious posture in front of the Buddha statue and kept chanting. The back of his head was seriously deformed, so the sutra he chanted was a little vague. However, when he walked out of the hall, it became extremely clear. In several yellow temples in the East Peak and West Peak, hundreds of monks in red cassocks sat cross-legged on the cliff platform. They put their palms together and looked determined. They kept chanting. In dozens of temples in the mist on the mountainside, thousands of monks in gray cassocks sat cross-legged in the meditation room. They put their palms together and looked nervous. They kept chanting. In hundreds of dark temples at the foot of the mountain, countless monks in colorful cassocks sat cross-legged in front of the Buddha statue. They put their palms together and looked confused. They kept chanting. In the vast field at the bottom of the giant pit, millions of people knelt in the direction of the Xiankong Temple. No matter they were dressed shabbily or wore gold and silver, they looked very pious and kept praying. Different positions in the Buddhist country would result in different clothes and different expressions. The strong practitioners of the Buddhist sect didn't need to sit in front of the Buddha statue, while the ordinary monks needed to rely on the Buddha to boost their courage. The strong ones looked calm, the strong ones looked determined, the weak ones looked nervous, and the confused monks didn't even know what was happening. The pious believers in the field also didn't know what was going on. However, their faith was the strongest. They didn't learn the sutra, but the effect of praying was the strongest. But no matter what kind of people they were chanting and praying. Bells, sutra sounds, and prayers were everywhere in the Buddha kingdom. The clouds were calm, and many traces gradually appeared. That was the shadow of the sutra in the clouds. The real sutra was in the air. Thousands of temple-sized characters glowed with a faint golden light. They floated over the heads of the herdsmen, the real temples, and the green trees on the cliffs. They kept arranging and combining in the sky. The dark field was brightly illuminated by these golden sutra. The believers kneeling in the field looked very excited. They became more pious, and their hearts to Buddha became firmer. Their prayers became more and more orderly and loud. Jun Mo, who stood quietly by a blue lake near the cliff, looked very special compared with the herdsmen kneeling on the ground. His figure looked so lonely and powerful. He looked at the golden sutra flying toward the giant peak and slightly raised his eyebrows. Thousands of golden sutra gathered from all directions and slowly rotated around the giant peak. They illuminated the green trees and the temples, and the light of Buddha on the cliff yard became brighter. In the light of Buddha, Ning Kei held the handle of the umbrella tightly with his pale face. Sang Sang looked at the depths of the light of Buddha, and her face became paler and paler. But she still didn't make a move because she wanted to see where the light of Buddha came from and where Buddha was. Ning Kei looked at her back and felt a little nervous. Although he didn't know the method of Xiankong temple chanting, nor did he know what the golden words in the sky meant, his talent in talisman Taoism was unparalleled. Intuitively, he guessed that if those golden words finally arranged into a Buddhist sutra, it would be difficult for Sang Sang to deal with the real attack of the Buddhism sect. So why didn't she make a move? Sang Sang looked up at the depths of the light of Buddha for a long time. Suddenly, she looked at the cliff yard under her feet and said, "I see." The mountain where Xiankong Temple was located was the tallest and largest mountain in the world. However, this mountain was always hidden in the giant sinkhole. From the surface, it was just an inconspicuous small mound. Its meaning was naturally consistent with Buddhism and Taoism, because this mountain was the tallest person in the world, but he didn't want to show up. This cliff yard was not a real cliff yard, but a palm open to the sky. The pear tree on the edge of the cliff was not a real tree, but a flower between the fingers of that person. That person was Buddha. Ning Ke and Sang Sang stood on the cliff yard, standing beside the pear tree. In fact, they were standing in the palm of Buddha, standing under the little white flower between his fingers. Sang Sang picked the little white flower on her temples and threw it into the wind. She looked at the top of the mountain and said sarcastically, "This mountain is just your corpse, not you. Do you want to trap me in your palm like this?" Yes, this mountain was not the Gautama Buddha, but the remains of the Gautama Buddha after his nirvanic rebirth. However, it was the remains of Buddha, the highest in the world. Who could escape from the palm of Buddha? Well, there's one more chapter. It will be published later. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 948. The mountain was the Buddha, and the cliff plateau was the Buddha's palm. The light of Buddha, which was full of silent power, did not come from the sky, but from the Buddha's palm, from the pious faith of countless monks and believers in Xiankong Temple and the plain at the bottom of the pit. It was the same for the scriptures that lingered between the peaks. They were written by Buddha himself countless years ago and sung by his disciples and believers devoutly after countless years. The Buddha's nature gilded the scriptures, and naturally, the Dharma of Buddha was boundless. Sang Sang quietly looked at the cliff plateau, the scriptures floating in the air, and the light of Buddha. She saw the Lang Temple in autumn a few years ago. That year, the Lang Temple also had such a silent light of Buddha. It came from the Buddha's statue on the top of Tile Mountain and started from the crisp bell in the hands of Bao Shu, the president of Commandment Yard. This year, the light of Buddha in Xiankong Temple was still cold. It came from the cliff plateau, from the palm of Buddha's slough, and from the distant bell behind the treasure hall on the top of the peak. That year, the light of Buddha in Lang Temple was to kill the daughter of Yama. This year, the light of Buddha in Xiankong Temple was to suppress Hao Yin. Hao Yin was the daughter of Yama, and the light of Buddha was still the same. Everything was clear now. For the headmaster of Academy, Hao Yin set up a trap for 1,000 years. Before that, Buddha had read the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and written notes. He knew what would happen in the future and predicted that a bright moon would appear when the night came. However, he did not say that Hao Yin would come to the human world and become weaker and weaker. Therefore, Buddha also set up a trap. He left many celestial devices in the human world, such as the Yulan bell, the chessboard, and the light of Buddha, to suppress the entrance to the underworld. However, how could Buddha not know that the underworld did not exist? From the beginning to the end, Buddha wanted to kill her. Buddha wanted to destroy Hao Yin. The Yulan bell was crushed into scrap iron by Jun and Mo, and the Buddha statue on the top of Tile Mountain was chopped into pieces by Jun and Mo. The chessboard was taken to the wilderness by Ning Ke and Sang Sang. However, the mountain transformed from the remains of Buddha was much taller than the stone statues on Hua Mountain. The bell of Xiankong Temple was much louder than the Yulan bell, and the light of Buddha was also much stronger. Sang Sang saw through everything. She and Ning Ke were telepathic, so Ning Ke naturally knew all the causes and effects. Only then did he know that the mountain where Xiankong Temple was located was actually the body of Buddha. He was shocked. No one could not be shocked at this moment. His face was pale, not only because he was too shocked, but also because the golden characters flying around the mountain peak had gradually found their order and were about to form a complete scripture. Each character was as big as a temple, and thousands of characters were a huge scripture. The golden scripture floated in the sky above Shinkong Temple and even covered the clouds. With a clang, Ninkei held the hilt of the cutlass. The iron cutlass was half out of the sheath, and the cold light was threatening. Just as he was about to attack, Sang Sang waved her sleeves. His green robe, which was covered in flowers, sparkled in the endless Buddhist light, like the most noble imperial robe. She was the king of this world. She waved her sleeves to the sky, and a gust of wind roared like a dragon, passing through the dense forests and temples between the peaks, and chopping down countless monks off the cliff. The wind came to the Mahavira Hall at the top of the peak. The ancient bell shook slightly, and the bell's sounds were slightly chaotic. Grass was flying on the stone steps. Qin Yin and the other old monks closed their eyes and were not afraid of being blinded. However, their Zen hearts were gradually becoming restless and confused, and blood seeped out of their mouths and noses. At this moment, Chi Mei, who was in front of the Buddha statue in the hall, changed from kneeling to sitting. His expression was firm and determined. He held a wooden staff and hit the wooden fish in front of him heavily. The wooden fish was instantly broken. Almost at the same time, the Vajra pestle held by the venerable beside the Buddha statue fell from the sky and hit Chi Mei's head heavily. With a puff, Chi Mei's skulls were all broken, and his brains and blood were scattered everywhere. Blood stains stained the Buddha statue. The Mahavira Hall, which was shaking in the gust of wind, suddenly stabilized and became one with the peak. The monks also finally stabilized their bodies and hearts. Sang Sang waved her sleeves and created wind. It was the wind of heaven, so it would not be annihilated. It floated up from the top of the peak and instantly came to the scripture composed of thousands of words in the sky. The clouds in the sky were chaotic, and the golden words under the clouds were scattered everywhere. In the golden light, the edges of the scripture that was about to take shape were messed up, and it was difficult to understand the content. Sang Sang broke the scripture left by the Buddha by waving her sleeves, but her expression became solemn. Because she had a better understanding of the surrounding environment in the moment she waved her sleeves. She was puzzled to find that she actually could not take Ning Ke away from the cliff plateau. The power of the prohibition cliff plateau was not the rule, nor was it an ordinary cultivation method. Cultivation was still within the rule. Even the small world above the 5 states was still in the world of Haoyan. In that case, even if she was much weaker after coming to the human world, she could still break the 3,000 worlds with a single thought. At this time, they were trapped in a macro world. How could there be a real macro world in the world of Haoyan? The Buddha turned his body into a mountain. There were countless temples on the mountain and countless believers at the foot of the mountain. The mountain originally had no consciousness, no spirit, and no life. But for countless years, the temples on the mountain were filled with incense. The monks kept chanting, and the believers in the wilderness worshipped. Finally, the Buddha nature was cultivated. The Buddha nature was the consciousness of the monks and believers. After countless years, countless people, countless consciousnesses, and countless lives, the world finally became a Buddha land. The real Buddha land was the real world, the big world of the nirvana. This world was located in the far west of the human world, so it was called the Western Nirvana. Even if she was in the Western Nirvana and could not leave easily, Sang Sang did not care. She was Haoyan, and even if she fought with millions or even more Buddhism believers, she would not lose. However, she had been in the human world for a long time, and the power of the human world that the headmaster poured into her body was constantly weakening her. If she wanted to break the Western Nirvana, she would have to pay a great price. If the Western Nirvana was destroyed, there was still Chang and City, the Academy, and the God-stunning array in the human world. Then how could she, who was extremely weak, do? So she hesitated. Ninkei did not know why she hesitated. The current situation was very bad. The Buddhist scripture that was blown away by the wind did not disappear, and the scattered parts fell to the cliff plateau. Those golden, monastery-sized characters gradually became smaller as they floated down to the plateau. Eventually, they turned into petal-like existences that exuded a strange fragrance. In the Buddha land, there were heavenly maids scattering flowers, which was very beautiful. Ninkei's expression was very solemn. The petals changed from the scripture fell on the surface of the big black umbrella, and each petal was as heavy as a giant stone. The light of Buddha was already very powerful. Countless petals fell on the surface of the big black umbrella, which was even more unbearable for human beings. In an instant, he felt that his arm was about to break. Ninkei inserted the handle of the umbrella into the cliff plateau, believing that since the mountain was the body of Buddha, it must be able to withstand it. He glanced at Sang Sang, who stood in silence in the light of Buddha. He pulled out the iron cutlass and chopped at the falling petals. The cutlass left a mark, and the mark was the word, and the word was the divine talisman, the E-talisman. The petals looked like petals, but they were actually words from the Buddhist scripture. The Dharma was incomparable, so the words were as heavy as a mountain. If Buddha had left some other means, Ninkei's cultivation state within the 5 states would not have been able to do anything. He could only grab Sang Sang's sleeves and hide behind her. But since it was a scripture, and the falling words were words, he could break it, because he was the best calligrapher and the most powerful divine talisman master in the world. He had broken countless words in the old library of the academy, and he was best at breaking words of his life. 7 divine talismans of E appeared in the air by the cliff. The falling petals touched the talisman and broke into pieces, because the words in the flowers were broken into meaningless lines. The petals continued to fall. Thousands of words were thousands of flowers, like the spring rain, and it did not stop for a long time. The 7 divine talismans of E fought against the power of Buddha, but they did not last long and disappeared. Looking at the scripture that was still half broken in the air, the words that kept falling from the slightly messy scripture, and the petals that were near him, Ninkei was not afraid at all. He waved his blade again. This time, he did not break words, but wrote a word in the sky. He wrote it very casually, and even he did not know what it was. Even if Buddha could know for 500 years after his death, he could not guess it. The strokes of the iron cutlass on the scripture were more like graffiti. No matter how simple the scripture was, as long as a naughty boy scribbled on it, even the most knowledgeable monk could not understand the meaning of it. The scripture in the Buddhist land was broken by Ninkei's random chopping. He was a monster cultivated by the headmaster of academy in Yensei. He did not belong to the world of Hao Yin or the world of Buddha. The last place he wanted to stay was the Western Nirvana. Using words to deal with Ninkei was like cutting fish in front of the headmaster of academy, or selling hot and sour noodle slice soup in front of Lin 47th Street. He sheathed his cutlass and looked at Sang Sang, saying, "Why don't you do it?" Sang Sang did not respond to him, thinking about something. Ninkei shook off the petals on the big black umbrella and put them on her head to block the light of Buddha for her. Sang Sang frowned slightly and said, "You can't do anything to me with these tricks." Ninkei said, "Look at your pale face. Why do you have to be brave?" Sang Sang said, "I am strong. Why do I have to be brave?" Ninkei thought that Hao Yin cared too much about his face and still had to be brave at this time. He put the handle of the umbrella into her hand, looked at the peak and shouted, "Let's give up. Can we stop fighting?" Sang Sang frowned again and was a little unhappy. Ninkei said seriously, "Look at me. I never know what face is." Shinkong Temple knew that Hao Yin would not give up, so he would not either. What answered Ninkei was the sound of bells all over the mountain and cliffs, endless solemn chanting, and a voice. "Since we are fighting with heaven, why should the academy stand on heaven's side?" This voice was quiet and majestic. If one listened carefully, it could only be described as magnificent. And what it asked was the most fundamental question, which was difficult for anyone to answer. Hearing this, Ninkei laughed happily. "Chief monk, you should still be buried in the ground now, but you are still so energetic. It is really admirable. It was not difficult to write 5 chapters yesterday. What was difficult was that after writing 5 chapters yesterday, I wrote another 10,000 words today. I'm already full of admiration for myself. I don't have any other requests. I just hope that everyone can give me more recommendation votes. Today, the moderator, Dream Chaser, helped me calculate that this Sunday's Nightfall needs 28,000 recommendation votes. I'm still short of 10,000. Please support me. Nightfall and the book review section need your help. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 949. Ninkei's laughter was extremely joyful and heroic. It flew out from the edge of the cliff, passed through the green pear blossoms, drifted over the Buddha's light and withered scripture petals, and echoed among countless temples. Even the chanting of millions of people and the distant bell that seemed to come from ancient times could not suppress it. Ever since he became invincible in the human world during the Right to Light, he had been tortured countless times by Sang Sang. When he took Sang Sang on the journey, she was always the one to take action. When she took action, he could only stand behind pitifully. How could he have a chance to take action? It seemed that he had defeated the master of calligraphy in the palace of the capital city. But in fact, it was because of her strength. In the end, he was reduced to carrying a load, leading a horse, and doing some sewing, mending, and washing work. But today, in the face of the boundless Buddha light and the falling flowers, Sang Sang was suppressed. He took out his iron knife and wrote several talismans to break the power of Buddha. How could he not feel refreshed? The chief monk's voice sounded again in the Buddha's light. Buddhism wanted to kill her back then, and you helped her. Now you're still helping her. Why? Has the academy betrayed the will of the headmaster? Ning Kei said, the academy's defiance of nature is the academy's business. She's my wife. Even if there is a problem between us, it should be a conflict within our family. What is the Buddha doing? After hiding for so many years, he jumped out to take advantage of the couple when they weren't paying attention. Disgusting. The chief monk said, karma, karma, and karma. Ultimately, it all depends on the result. Ning Kei said, if the Buddha's karma is to turn the human world into the world at the foot of the mountain, then the academy will definitely not let his karma come true. The chief monk asked seriously why. Ning Kei said, because it's disgusting. The chief monk remained silent. Ning Kei was in high spirits and would not stop there. He said loudly, Buddha is merciful. Among the tens of thousands of monks in Xiankong Temple, is there anyone who has the face to say, where is this compassion? The chief monk said indifferently, then you go with Hao Ian. Ning Kei said, your pretentious look reminds me of me in the past. It's disgusting indeed. Holding the big black umbrella, Sang Sang looked at Ning Kei and said, you are quite disgusting now. Ning Kei said helplessly, understand your position and position, okay? At this moment, the great Buddhist scripture in the sky was still scattered into countless flower petals and fell down. It no longer emitted a strange fragrance, nor was it as powerful as before, but it was still extremely dangerous. The chief monk stopped talking, but there were still many people talking. Countless believers in the temples and fields at the foot of the peak kept chanting or praying. The light of Buddha on the cliff plateau gradually grew brighter. The Buddha had left countless foreshadowing for Hao Ian, which was as vast as the sea. How could Ning Kei solve it? And the most dangerous celestial device was still in the human world. It reigned in Chaoyang City. The 72 monasteries looked solemn and dignified in the drizzle. When the bell rang in the Xiankong Temple in the depths of western wilderness, the bell rang in all 72 temples at the same time. The bell rang in every street and alley in the city, echoing in the hearts of all believers. The Buddhist bell could clear one's mind and alert one's mind. Whether it was the old woman in the alley or the young emperor in the palace, they all came to the temples under the guidance of the bell. All the Buddhist temples in Chaoyang City were crowded with believers. Men and women, young and old, knelt in front of the Buddha statue and kept kowtowing and praying. The White Tower Temple was even more so. The stone plateau in front of the lake was full of believers. The lake was very clean and calm. The beautiful white tower and weeping willows were reflected on the lake, which was the most famous scenery in Chaoyang City. It was the best memory for people living here. The autumn wind blew and the lake rippled. The white tower reflected on the lake gradually became distorted. This was a very common scene, but the believers who kept praying by the lake were extremely shocked, because as the reflection of the white tower in the lake was distorted, the real white tower by the lake was also distorted. The tower shadow was an illusion. How could it affect the real white tower? The autumn wind gradually became stronger, whistling over the lake and shaking the lake. The tower shadow and the tree shadow on the lake were all crushed into pieces and could no longer be seen clearly. The white tower by the lake gradually became illusory, as if it was about to disappear in the air. The lake trembled more and more violently. The foaming waves looked like the clouds in the sky or the water in a pot of boiling water. The reflection of the white tower turned into foam and finally disappeared. There was a loud bang. The lake suddenly disappeared, leaving only the dry lake bottom. The white tower by the lake was also gone. The white tower had accompanied the believers of Yueluan Kingdom for countless years. It had long become their spiritual belief or life memory. But today it just disappeared in front of them. Everyone who saw this had a feeling that they would never see the return of the White Tower. The most famous scenery in Chaoyang City would never be reborn again. The believers were shocked and sad. They didn't know what to think at this time. They only knew that they could kneel by the lake and keep kowtowing and praying to the bottom altar of the White Tower. They were even more pious than before. The sky above Shinkong Temple was always covered by thick clouds. Since Buddha wanted to destroy Hao Yin, he naturally couldn't let her see the clear sky. All of a sudden, an extremely terrifying sound of wind rang out from high up in the sky. The center of the clouds suddenly bulged to the ground for hundreds of feet. The bulging clouds were about to touch the top of the giant peak. Thunder and lightning flashed at the bottom, and then rain fell. This was not real rain, but the lake in the White Tower Temple from countless miles away in the human world. There were even many swimming fish and broken lotus branches in it. The heavy rain poured down, and the bulging clouds suddenly split open. A white tower broke out of the clouds and fell on the cliff plateau between the peaks. The White Tower also came from countless miles away in the human world. With the awareness of all the believers of Buddha in the human world, it broke the space and came to the western Pure Land to suppress Hao Yin under the tower. In the autumn several years ago, the chief monk of scripture had thought of suppressing Sang Sang under the White Tower. Several years later, in this autumn, the means left by Buddha finally made this scene a reality. The heavy rain fell on the cliff plateau, and the branches of the pear trees drooped. However, the small green pears and the green leaves didn't fall to the ground. Countless water flowed down the cliff edge and formed a thin waterfall. Holding the black umbrella, Sang Sang stood in the middle of the heavy rain, still looking calm. Ning Ke didn't have an umbrella, so he was instantly soaked by the rain. Several lotus branches like dead snakes hung on his shoulders, and a slippery loach crawled into his arms. He looked very embarrassed. What really made him feel uneasy was not the lake, but the white tower that broke out of the clouds. The bulging part of the clouds was very close to the peak, so the white tower soon passed the Mahavira Hall on the peak and unwaveringly suppressed the cliff plateau where he and Sang Sang were. The white tower that fell from the sky contained the supreme power of Buddha, and the light of Buddha on the cliff plateau also became stronger. There was a vague connection between the two that couldn't be broken. The cliff plateau was the palm of the Buddha's body. When the white tower fell, it would fall into the palm of the Buddha because it was the most powerful instrument left by the Buddha in the human world. Ning Ke didn't mind that the Buddha wanted to take back his treasure, but he and Sang Sang were standing in the palm of the Buddha and couldn't leave. When the white tower fell, they would be suppressed. Then how could they turn the situation around? The white tower fell, and the power of Buddha approached. Ning Ke held the iron cutlass and looked around blankly. He didn't know how to deal with it. He turned his head and saw that the woman was still in a daze under the umbrella. He spat out a mouthful of blood. After wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, the woman was still in a daze. Ning-Ke was helpless and in great pain. He shouted at her, "Oh my God, why are you still in a daze at this time? Hurry up and use your divine ability." Sang Sang raised her head and looked at the white tower that was falling in the light of Buddha. The heavy rain suddenly stopped, and the clouds were suddenly quiet. The falling of the white tower suddenly slowed down, as if it was suspended in the air. It just slowed down, but didn't really stop. No matter how slow it was, as long as it didn't stop falling, the white tower would fall on the cliff plateau one day and press her and Ning-Ke under the tower. To get rid of the current situation, they had to leave the cliff plateau. To leave the cliff plateau, they had to forcibly break the big world composed of the light of Buddha, scriptures, and the awareness of millions of believers. Buddha's Western paradise. Sang Sang was not willing to pay such a high price, because there was still the academy in the human world. She clasped her hands behind her back and looked at the white tower in the air expressionlessly, thinking quietly. Seeing her like this, Ning-Ke was very helpless. He waved the iron cutlass to cut the number of scriptures floating in front of the cliff and rushed to her side. He squeezed into the big black umbrella and shouted in her ear, "Wake up." Sang Sang's expression didn't change. She said, "I'm not asleep now." Ning-Ke said, "Think of a way quickly. I don't want to be Su Xian." Sang Sang said, "It's the white snake under the tower." Ning-Ke was very annoyed and said, "If you become the white snake, can I still stay outside the tower?" Sang Sang looked at the white tower and said, "I've been weakened by your academy. I can't break this tower." Ning-Ke said, "So it's my responsibility?" "Well, even if it's my responsibility, you are Hao Yin. You must have some treasures with you, right?" Sang Sang looked at him and pointed to the big black umbrella. Ning-Ke was very dissatisfied and said, "Look at how many treasures Buddha left. You only left this broken umbrella?" He emphasized the word broken. The big black umbrella was indeed broken now, but if it could perceive, it would feel very wronged. Sang Sang didn't feel wronged because only weak human beings would feel wronged. She said, "Only the weak would make so many preparations. I don't need anything in the human world." In her view, Buddha was the weak one. Ning-Ke said, "The weak one you said is about to suppress you, the strong one." Sang Sang looked at him and said, "Do you think Buddha can defeat me with these methods?" Ning-Ke said, "I'm watching this tragedy happen." Sang Sang said, "Whimsical." Ning-Ke said, "Isn't he thinking about opening the sky? If I say it can't be opened, then it can't be opened." She suddenly looked at the luggage behind Ning-Ke and the chessboard left by Buddha. She said expressionlessly, "Because I am Hao Yin and you are nothing. This is the only chapter for today. I'm a little tired. Are you surprised?" "Well, I'm not kidding. This is indeed the only chapter for today. I watched a movie with my wife. I'm a little happy and tired. I came back a little late. Tomorrow will be a big hit. A big hit. I'm good at this rhythm. In fact, the most important thing in life is to be happy." Seeing that Ning-Ke and his wife are still so happy in such an environment, I also hope that everyone can read happily and be happy in all kinds of ways. If anyone is unhappy, it's all my fault. Just blame me. Everyone, please give me some recommendation votes to make me and the moderators happy. Thank you. See you tomorrow. There will be a big hit. It's definitely not a lie. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 950. After saying that, Sang Sang's aura suddenly changed. She was still standing on the cliff platform, under the pear tree, right beside Ning-Ke, sharing the same umbrella. However, in Ning-Ke's eyes, she seemed to have suddenly become many times taller, as if she was about to touch the sky and look down at the white tower in the sky. Facing the Buddha's most powerful means, she responded with the immeasurability of the Buddhism sect. Ning-Ke had seen the Abbey Dean's immeasurability and the drunkard's immeasurability. Only her immeasurability was truly immeasurability. The Xiankong Temple felt her change. The bells all over the cliff and the chanting in countless temples did not stop. Instead, They became louder and louder with the change of her aura. Every word of the sutra chanted by the monks in the temple was as heavy as the temple itself. Rocks from the east and west peaks gradually fell. The bodies of the tens of thousands of monks shook uneasily. Blood gushed out of their mouths, but they still chanted the sutra. Ning-Ke found that Sang-Sang's face was a little pale and could not help but worry. Sang-Sang knew what he was thinking and said calmly, "This is my world. No one could trap me." However, this was the Buddha kingdom, a very big world. As the bells of the Xiankong temple rang, the bells of the 72 temples in Chaoyang City rang at the same time in the autumn rain. The bells of the Lank Temple on the Wam Mountain, which was far away by the sea, began to ring. The bells of the Wanyan Tower Temple in Chang and did not ring. The Red Lotus Temple, which had long been in ruins, only had a deformed bell, which began to ring in the autumn wind, like the crying of ghosts. There was a shabby nunnery outside the capital of the Yin Kingdom, which had been abandoned for many years. Since last year, more than a dozen widowed and childless women were driven out of their homes by their families. Their land and houses were taken away. The women gathered in the shabby nunnery. They used tiles to shave off their hair that had not yet turned gray. Accompanied by the broken lamps and broken Buddha statues, they were hopelessly prepared to spend the rest of their lives there, or they would suddenly die in the hands of bandits one night. Today, they suddenly heard the sound of a bell ringing in the distance. The women had lost all hope after being tortured by the cold and cruel life, but the sound of the bell seemed to have injected some kind of power into their bodies. They stood up and ran to the broken bell at the back of the nunnery. They clenched their fists and kept hitting the surface of the bell until their fists bled. It seemed that they wanted to vent all the resentment and despair they had accumulated over the years through the sound of the bell, so that they could find comfort in their next life. The sound from the broken clock was hoarse and unpleasant, as if they were crying loudly. In Chaoyang City, countless monks knelt in front of the Buddha statue and kept chanting sutras. Countless believers knelt in front of the lake and the white tower that had disappeared and kept praying to Buddha. In the Wanyan Tower Temple in Chang, and the monks were stunned to hear the bell ringing behind the courtyard. The stone statues seemed to come alive. In the Lang Temple on Wam Mountain, the abbot Monk Wanhai looked solemn. He knelt in silence before the stone statue of Buddha on the peak. In the city and countryside, all the people who had been helped by the ascetic monks, no matter old women or children, knelt devoutly in the omnipresent sound of the bell and kept praying to Buddha. The bell, the chanting of sutras, and the sound of prayer rang in every corner of the human world. The human world was the Buddhist kingdom. As long as people believed in Buddha, they would enter the big world he left behind. The Western Pure Land. Sang-Sang's face became paler and paler. She had underestimated the power of Buddha, but she was not flustered. Since these were all arranged by Buddha, Buddha must not be dead. Then as long as she found Buddha and killed him, the Pure Land that Buddha had set up in the human world would naturally be destroyed. All these methods would become illusions and no longer exist. And she had already found out where Buddha was. Ning-Ke looked at her face and was very worried. Sang-Sang suddenly turned to look at him and said, "Eat the green pear in your sleeve." Ning-Ke was stunned. There was indeed a green pear in his sleeve. It was the first fruit from the pear tree by the cliff. But why did she want him to eat the green pear now? Soon he thought he understood what Sang-Sang meant. Just like under the statue of Buddha on Wam Mountain and in Master Chishan's cave, he could enter Buddha's chessboard as long as he ate the green pear. Could he leave Buddha's Western Pure Land by entering the chessboard? Ning-Ke trusted Sang-Sang very much. It had nothing to do with the relationship between husband and wife, but because she was Hao-Ian and could calculate everything in the world. However, he could not help but hesitate at this moment. After eating the green pear last time, it was only their consciousness or souls that entered the chessboard, but their bodies were still outside. Even if Sang-Sang used her great power to let their bodies and souls enter the chessboard at the same time, what kind of danger would there be in the chessboard? He looked at the chessboard taken out from his luggage and at the blurry lines on it. He had a terrible guess. What if Buddha was hiding in the chessboard? There is no what if. Buddha is in the chessboard. Sang Sang put away the big black umbrella and looked at the scripture petals falling from the sky. She looked at the light of Buddha that appeared between the cliff plateau and enveloped her in Ning, Quebec. She looked at the slowly falling white tower and said, "When I came to this mountain, Xiankong Temple was quiet and Buddha was speechless. Because I am Hao Yin, how dare they touch me?" Ning Ke asked confusedly, "Then why do they touch me now?" Sang Sang looked at him and said, "Because the pear on the tree was ripe and you picked it." Ning Ke looked at the small green pear in his right hand and the chessboard in his left hand. He vaguely understood something. Back then, Lang Temple was full of powerhouses, and Second Brother destroyed the Buddha's instrument and Dharma statue. Only the chessboard was still silent. Now he thought about it. There was indeed something wrong. When the green pear was ripe, we could enter the chessboard and see the real body of Buddha. The monks in the mountain began to fear, and so did Buddha. So they risked their 10,000 years of foundation to stop us. Why didn't I see Buddha when I entered the chessboard in Lang Temple? I didn't wake up at that time, so I couldn't see him, and it was meaningless for him to see me. Meaningless? Was Buddha also waiting to see you as Hao Yin? Yes. Sang Sang looked at the chessboard in his hand and thought, "No wonder I couldn't find any trace of Buddha in the human world, and no wonder the heart of heaven always fell on Ning Ke's side when I looked around in Xiankong Temple. It's not that I can't leave this man, but that I have long noticed that Buddha is hiding in the chessboard." That's good. Ning Ke felt that the chessboard in his hand suddenly became very heavy. Anyone who knew that he was holding the world after Buddha's nirvana or the Buddha's coffin would have the same feeling. We know that Buddha is inside, but we still want to go in? He was a little uneasy. Sang Sang said, "I came to kill Buddha, and I know where Buddha is. Of course I have to go." Ning Ke was about to say something when he suddenly felt something in his mouth. Then the sweet and delicious pear juice flowed down his throat and into his stomach. That green pear was eaten by him. What was done could not be undone. The rice had become porridge, and the pear had fallen into his stomach. What had already happened could not be changed. He quickly accepted this cruel reality and walked towards a green tree by the cliff. "What are you going to do?" Sang Sang asked. Ning Ke reached out to pick the pear and said, "You haven't eaten it yet." Sang Sang said, "I don't need it. I have been in this chessboard, and the chessboard is also my world." After saying this, there was a chess piece between her fingers. A few years ago, in Lank Mountain, she and Master Chishan played the last game of the 3 games of chess on Wa Mountain. The master asked her to choose a chess piece, and she did not hesitate to choose a black chess piece, which made the master sigh with emotion. 2 years ago, in the wilderness, the chess piece in her hand had changed from black to white. The headmaster in the carriage saw this scene, and the world changed. The headmaster knew all the causes and effects, and began to take her and Ning Ke on the long journey in the human world to make arrangements for Hao Yin's coming to the human world. That chess piece had been in Sang Sang's hand, but now it was hard to tell what color it was. It seemed to be black and white, and it kept changing at will, as if it was the will of heaven. Ning Ke looked at the chess piece in her hand and thought of many things. He silently leveled the chessboard. She put the chess piece on the chessboard. There was no sound and no wind blew. Ning Ke and Sang Sang's figures disappeared from the cliff plateau. The chessboard stayed in the air for a moment, and then fell on the cliff plateau, splashing a few drops of rain. A few drops of rain flowed out of the cliff and turned into several large waterfalls, making a thunderous sound in the valley. Without the obstruction of the power of heaven, the white tower from Chaoyang City whistled through the air and fell heavily on the chessboard. With a loud bang, it was shaken to the old temple behind the cliff. The old temple was shattered into ruins, and the road to the cliff cave was blocked by the white tower. The chessboard bounced on the cliff plateau for a few times, and then it stopped, raising a very gentle wind. As the wind blew, the green trees by the cliff kept shaking, and countless small green pears fell. Before the white tower broke through the clouds, thousands of hectares of lake water came from Chaoyang City and washed the cliff plateau like a rainstorm. However, it could not knock down a single green pear. At this time, these green pears fell with the wind like rain. Clap, clap, clap. In the noisy rain-like sounds, the green pears fell and fell on the cliff plateau, softened by the rainwater. They were instantly shaken into juice, leaving only hundreds of pear pits. The pear pits were blown by the wind, fell along the waterfalls, and fell into the abyss at the foot of the mountain, never to be found again. This pear tree was planted by Buddha himself. It bloomed every 500 years, bore fruit every 5 days, and fell to the ground every 5 minutes. The pear fell to the ground and drifted with the current, never to be seen again. There were only 3 green pears left in Xiankong Temple for countless years. When Master Qishan left Xiankong Temple, he brought all 3 green pears to the human world. Because he was the illegitimate son of the chief preaching monk of that generation, he was not punished. The first green pear was used by Master Qishan to save tens of thousands of victims of the plague after the flood of South Jin Kingdom. Because of this, his Zen heart was backfired, and he lost all his state and became a useless person. The second green pear was used by Master Qishan to enlighten Master Lotus, who lived in the temple. Lotus was born beside the pear tree by the cliff of Xiankong Temple, meditating on Tao. It had to be said that it was fate or Buddha's fate. The third green pear was eaten by Sang Sang and Ning Ke, which let the master know Song Song's identity. From then on, a bloody journey began in the human world. 500 years later, the green pear tree in Xiankong Temple bloomed and bore hundreds of green fruits. Only one survived, and it was eaten by Ning Quebec. But this time, the matter to be decided was relatively simple. This green pear would decide life and death. The life and death of Hao Yin and Buddha. This is the first chapter. There will definitely be more today. Yesterday, I said that I would break out, so I must work hard. But I have to write it carefully. My hands are a little tired, so my speed will be slower. I will continue to work hard. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 9:51. There was a gentle breeze on the cliff plateau. The white tower was built between the broken temple and the messy eaves. It was not as dazzling as it was by the lake in Chaoyang City, which was admired and loved by thousands of people. It was so dim that it felt decadent. Countless leaves fell from the heavy rain, and hundreds of fruits fell from the wind. The branches of the green trees by the cliff were scattered like a naked woman. The waterfall at the bottom of the cliff seemed to be laughing at it loudly. The chessboard was lying in the rain on the cliff plateau. The clouds covering the vault of heaven had dispersed, and the light of Buddha on the cliff platform had disappeared. The scriptures glowing with golden light had dispersed with the clouds. There were no more petals falling down. The bells and the chanting of scriptures in the temple had also stopped. The monks walked out of the temples in the Xiankong Temple and looked at the cliff plateau above. They felt uneasy and gradually calmed down. They returned to their temples and resumed their daily homework. The bells of countless temples in the world had also stopped ringing. The elders and abbots in the temples looked at the Buddha statue and were speechless. Suddenly, a welcoming monk came to report that a princess or a prince had come to offer incense. The elders and abbots all changed their expressions when they heard this. They put on the appearance of an enlightened monk and moved forward to welcome them. They were secretly thinking how much incense money they should collect today. Of course, they should not show too much of their worldly aura in case the nobles would be unhappy. They did not remember who the Buddha was at this moment. Countless believers in the human world also woke up. They rubbed their bruised foreheads and looked around in panic. They did not know what had happened. An old woman suddenly heard her grandson crying. She looked back and saw her grandson rolling off the bed with a bruise that was very similar to hers on his forehead. She could not help but panic. She hurriedly climbed up with her sore and numb body. She held her grandson in her arms and kept comforting him. She kicked the ground and said that it was the fault of the land. She did not remember who the Buddha was at this moment. In the shabby nunnery outside the capital of Yin Kingdom, the women looked at the broken bell, which did not make a sound no matter how hard they hit it. They looked terrified. Could it be that they could not hear the bell anymore? Suddenly, they began to cry loudly. Even if they could get more blessings in the next life, how could they live such a miserable life in this life? In a daze, they walked back to the room covered with straw, knelt down with their palms together, and prayed to Buddha. In the wilderness at the bottom of the giant sinkhole, millions of people kneeling on the ground woke up one after another. When the nobles found themselves kneeling together with the untouchables, they couldn't help but feel very angry. They waved the whips in their hands and drew more than a dozen bloodstains on the bodies of several serfs before they felt a little better. The serfs were whipped more than a dozen times and were in great pain, but they did not dare to resist. They supported their tired bodies to work until late at night. After eating terrible food, they began to pray to Buddha before going to bed, silently praying that the merciful Buddha would guide them to the Western paradise as soon as possible. Most of the time, the beliefs of the human world were like this. Whether it was the Buddha or Hao Yin, they were easily forgotten. Of course, sometimes it was also very difficult to forget. Happy people tend to forget their faith, which is the last hope of the unfortunate. From his point of view, faith may be good, but at the same time, it means bad. Perhaps because of this, there was such a group of non-believers in the back of the mountain of the academy. There were many people who could understand this, but because of their position and standpoint, they could not and did not dare to express their opinions on this issue. Master Huang Yang walked out of the meditation room and listened to the chanting coming from the top of the mountain. He felt the tranquility from countless temples and found that nothing had happened here. In fact, many things had happened. Sang Sang and Ning Ke entered the chessboard by themselves. But in the eyes of the Xiankong temple, it was naturally Buddha who put Hao Yin and her attendants into the chessboard with the supreme Dharma and was purifying them. Master Huang Yang's monk robe fluttered in the wind. He went straight up the mountain road and was about to reach the cliff plateau. He was going to pick up the chessboard because Ning Ke was in it. Ning Ke was too important to the Tang Empire, and he could not watch him die. Master Huang Yang was an eminent monk of the Buddhism sect, but first of all, he was a Tang man. At this moment, a quiet and majestic voice came from afar. As I have heard, there's a mountain named Prajna, and it is 108,000 times heavier than Tianqi Mountain. The voice came from the distant cliff ground, from the chief preaching monk. This was the supreme Dharma of the Buddhism sect. Words, obey. Years ago, in the White Tower Temple in Chaoyang City, the chief preaching monk told the eldest brother about this scripture. This scripture described a mountain named Prajna. The giant peak where the Xiankong temple was located was Prajna. As the Buddha's words were spoken, the cliff echoed and responded. The majestic Prajna mountain suddenly became heavier. Master Huang Yang, who was flying on a mountain road, suddenly stopped. With a crack, Master Huang Yang's leg bones were all broken. He was seriously injured by the mountain itself, above the cliff on the edge of the giant sinkhole. The chief preaching monk's body was still buried in the ground. Only his head was above the ground. His two white eyebrows drooped in the dust, and his face was pale and weak. The chief preaching monk was integrated into the earth by Sang Sang. These days, he had been struggling under the endless pressure of the earth and was already exhausted. Now he had to use the words obey, which made him even more exhausted. A gust of autumn wind blew, and the faint fragrance of wine spread in the wind of the wilderness. The drunkard, who was still wearing a scholar's gown, appeared in front of the chief preaching monk's head. The drunkard did not look at the chief preaching monk's funny face, but stared at the cliff plateau between the giant peaks. His face was very pale, and his eyes were full of fear and anxiety. The chief preaching monk looked up at him with difficulty and said, "It seems that you already know what happened." The drunkard looked terrible and said, "Such a big movement. The whole human world knows about it. Even if I want to pretend that I don't know, how can I?" When the bell and scripture were ringing everywhere in the human world, he had been in the small town between Yin and Song. However, even though he was with the butcher, he still felt very uneasy and drank tea with Mr. Chow for a long time. "I didn't expect that you really dared to attack Hao Yin," the drunkard murmured. The chief preaching monk said slowly, "This is the arrangement of the Buddha." The drunkard looked at the small crack under the chief preaching monk's neck, picked up a stone, and threw it in. The crack between the chief preaching monk's neck and the ground expanded instantly. That was because the stone was expanding inside, which was the immeasurable state of the Buddhism sect. After a while, the chief preaching monk climbed out from the ground. His Buddha's body that had reached the Vajra body did not have any scars, but his kasaya and the monk's staff had been crushed into powder by the ground. He stood in the autumn wind in the wilderness, naked, and did not look like a senior monk of the Buddhism sect at all. The chief preaching monk took a piece of clothing from the drunkard and said, "You learned the immeasurable Dharma from the Buddha years ago, and I used it to get out. Now that I think about it, it's all because of the fate of Buddha." The drunkard said, "This is the world of Hao Yin, and the fate of Buddha is unpredictable. If she did not go to the chessboard, I would not be able to pull you out from the ground. So it's not the fate of Buddha, but the fate of heaven." The chief preaching monk said, "From today on, there is no fate of heaven, only fate of Buddha." The drunkard said, "I really don't know where your confidence comes from." The chief preaching monk said, "Follow me." The two left the cliff and came to the cliff plateau between the giant peaks. The chief preaching monk looked at the dilapidated pear tree and said after a long silence, "This tree was planted by the Buddha himself. The pear means separation, which means separation from the human world." The drunkard said seriously, "It blooms every 500 years. Has Hao Yin been gone for 500 years? The chief preaching monk said, "I don't know the age of the tree. Hao Yin can never return to the human world." The drunkard slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "If Hao Yin kills the Buddha, she can naturally return." The chief preaching monk said calmly, "The Buddha has reached nirvana. How can he be killed?" The drunkard frowned. Until now, no one knew whether the Buddha was alive or dead. This giant peak, named Prajna, was transformed from the Buddha's body. Then where was the Buddha's consciousness? The chief preaching monk knelt down to the chessboard in the rain and praised. "The Buddha knows the past and future for 5,000 years. He is not in the Xiankong temple or the Buddha's body. The Buddha is in this small chessboard. He has waited for Hao Yin for 5,000 years and finally met him today. How wise and merciful he is." The drunkard looked a little confused. If the consciousness of the Buddha was indeed in the chessboard, why did the chief preaching monk say that Hao Yin couldn't be destroyed? What was nirvana? Looking at the ordinary chessboard, he pondered for a long time, but still got nothing. This chessboard was the battlefield where the Buddha waited for Hao Yin. Unless the headmaster returned to the human world, no one could enter it. No one was qualified to participate in it, not even the drunkard. It was worth thinking that when Hao Yin entered the chessboard, there was another person beside him. Indeed, no one could enter the chessboard, but that person had entered the chessboard in advance. How would he affect the war? The drunkard said, "There is a problem." The chief preaching monk said, "What problem?" The drunkard said, "There is a person. In addition to heaven and Buddha, there was also a person on the chessboard." The chief monk said calmly, "Although Ning Kei's state has improved quite fast, he is only in the knowing destiny state. How could he be qualified to participate in such a high-level event?" The knowing destiny state was the peak of the 5 states of cultivation. However, the chief monk of scripture and the drunkard were powerhouses who had surpassed the 5 states, so they did not care. Even they could not touch the battle of heaven and Buddha, let alone Ning Quebec. The drunkard said sternly, "Even if he can't influence what happens in the chessboard, he can influence the world outside the chessboard. How can the Academy ignore him when he is in the chessboard?" The Academy had eldest brother in 23 years cicada cultivation, 2 powerhouses who had surpassed the 5 states, and Jun Mo, who no one knew how powerful he would be if he got angry. If these people knew that the Buddhism sect trapped Ning Kei in the chessboard, what would they do? What would they do? Will Jun Mo flip out? The chief monk said with a smile, "Didn't the Abbey Dean ask you to deliver the message because he predicted today's situation?" No one knew where Sang Sang and Ning Kei were at this moment, not even they themselves. Looking at the familiar streets and the people's clothes, they were silent for a long time. Ning Kei was so lost in thought that he even forgot to close the big black umbrella. There were many shrines along the streets, in which there were statues of Buddha and Venerable. The smell of spices filled the air, including spices for food and incense for the Buddha. The passers-by looked very happy. He and Sang Sang entered the chessboard, but they found themselves in Chaoyang City. What's going on? You asked me, but who should I ask? Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang and sighed. Of course you should ask Buddha. Sang Sang put her hands behind her back and walked to the street. She said, then we have to find him first. Chapter 2. My wife and I went to walk the dog and took a break. Chapter 3. Try to get out before 1 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come a Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 952. Suddenly, a bell rang in a temple not far away from the street. Ning Ke was folding his umbrella. He was tortured by the bell in Xiankong Temple. Hearing the bell again, he was shocked and grabbed Sang Sang's hand. Sang Sang looked at him with no emotion in her eyes. Then Ning Ke remembered that he had left Xiankong Temple. He let go of her hand in embarrassment and put his hand behind his back like she did. The bell in Chaoyang City was ringing louder and louder, and all the temples were ringing. Ning Ke could clearly hear that the loudest bell came from the north of the city, which should be the ancient bell in White Tower Temple. Some pedestrians were eating starch jelly, some were eating pilaf with banana leaves, and some were watching monkey shows. Hearing the bell, they put down what they were doing and walked to the nearest temple. Some people could not leave, so they knelt on the street and kept praying with their palms put together. The monkey showman also knelt on the ground in fear and trepidation. He even pressed the naughty monkey to the ground and kowtowed. Only Ning Ke and Sang Sang were left standing. Although the devout followers of the Buddhism sect did not look at them with hostility, they could not help but feel puzzled. The changes brought about by the bell were actually very cute, like some kind of flash mob that Ning Ke had seen in that world. The little monkey that was gently pressed by its owner kept rolling its eyes, which was also very cute. But Ning Ke suddenly felt a little disgusted because he had seen the tragic world under the Xiankong Temple. Sang Sang hated these scenes even more. She gently flicked her sleeves. With a light brush, flowers bloomed on the green sleeves. A gust of wind rose on the street, blowing away the starched jelly stall and blowing away the rice grains on the banana leaves. Many people were blinded by the wind. The man who was playing the monkey tried to rub his eyes, but he forgot to grab the rope. The little monkey, who had regained its freedom, ran out immediately. It didn't run too far away. It just looked for the fragrant and spicy rice grains among the flying banana leaves and ate happily. The bell of the temple on the street was also blown by the gust of wind, and the rhythm of the bell became messy. The wind did not stop and went up to the sky, messing up the clouds over Chaoyang City. Sang Sang was somewhat satisfied and continued to walk forward with her hands behind her back. Looking at her back, Ning Ke fell silent. When she was in the West Hill Divine Palace, she did not need to do anything. She did not even have to think about it. She only needed to feel a little uneasy, and stars would appear and disappear in her eyes. Countless clouds would appear from thousands of miles away, and thunder and lightning would appear on the top of Peach Mountain. However, after leaving the West Hill, especially after entering the depths of the wilderness, she began to flick her sleeves when she was in a fight or when she was angry. Sang Sang's divine might was still far beyond the scope of human imagination, but compared to the once omnipotent Sang Sang, she had indeed become much weaker. Ning Ke was a little uneasy, but he could not say anything. The reason why she was getting weaker was because the headmaster had left the power of the human world in her body. It was because of the long and happy journey 2 years ago, but now that he thought about it, it was such a dangerous journey. More importantly, it was because he took her to walk in the human world and did not let her go back. The streets were filled with smoke and dust blown by the wind. The smoke and dust were full of the smell of spices, and it was a little choking. Perhaps it was because the people here were used to it since they were young, but there was no sound of coughing. Walking in the smoke and dust was also walking on the old road. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had lived in this city for a long time. He once fled here with her on his back. Many streets and alleys were left with his footprints and blood stains of the people he killed. However, after nearly 3 years, those bloodstains had long disappeared. It seemed incredible to enter the chessboard on the cliff plateau of Xiankong Temple and come out in Chaoyang City. In fact, there was only one possibility. Just like in Lang Temple, there was also a space passage between Xiankong Temple and Chaoyang City, and this chessboard was the key to open this space passage. Back then, Ning Ke and Sang Sang came directly from Lang Temple in the southeast to Xiankong Temple in the depths of the western wilderness. Today, they came directly from Xiankong Temple to Chaoyang City. At this time, the two of them were walking in Chaoyang City. It seemed that they were naturally looking for the traces of Buddha. However, both Sang Sang and Ning Ke were very clear that Buddha could not be in this city. In the human world, it was impossible to hide from Hao Yan's eyes. Ning Ke did not point this out, nor did Sang Sang. It seemed that the two of them were really looking for Buddha. Since they were looking for him, it would naturally take time. Let's find a place to stay first, and then slowly look for him, he said. Sang Sang did not speak. Her silence meant that she agreed. If she wanted to object, she would speak directly or cut Ning Ke into pieces to show her attitude. In a noisy block in the north of the city, there was a very quiet and even deathly courtyard. It was the small courtyard that the two of them used to live in. Several years had passed, but no one had come to visit it. Pushing open the courtyard door, the small courtyard was still so quiet. The black cloth that Ning Ke used to cover the window was still hanging, but it was covered with a lot of dust. The putty that was smeared on the cracks of the woodshed window had already cracked and peeled off. Sang Sang looked at the shabby courtyard. A wet wind came from the back of the courtyard and instantly carried away all the dust in the house. The small courtyard suddenly became very clean. She pushed open the door of the woodshed. After thinking for a while, she did not go in. Instead, she turned into the bedroom and lay on the bed. Now she was no longer the daughter of Yama and naturally did not need to hide from anyone. Cook more vegetables for dinner, she said. Ning Ke nodded and walked to the courtyard to prepare firewood for cooking. Looking at the lonely small tree, he was a little reluctant to do it. Where was the black crow on the branch? The stream behind the courtyard was still there, and there was still a tree by the stream. He chopped off enough wood with his palm and was about to leave when he suddenly saw a deep fist mark on a tree. Back then, he had to take care of Sang Sang, who was seriously ill, and always be on guard against the pursuit of the Buddhism and Taoism sects. He was always anxious and nervous. When he was about to give up, he went to the stream and wanted to vent his anger by punching the tree. However, he did not expect that his fist was so hard that it almost broke the tree. Looking at the fist mark on the tree, Ning Ke laughed. He was very happy that the tree was not broken, and he was also very happy that his fist mark was still there, because these were his most cherished memories. Just like the tree in the courtyard and the black crow that had once landed on it. Piling the wood in the corner of the courtyard, he pushed open the bedroom door and walked to the bed. Looking at Sang Sang, who was sleeping soundly, he asked, "What do you want to eat? I'm not familiar with the produce of the Yuelin Kingdom." Sang Sang opened her eyes, which were bright and clear, without any tiredness or sleepiness after waking up. Ning Ke had never understood what sleep meant to her. She thought for a while and said, "I'll go shopping with you." The two went to the market and bought a lot of vegetables. Then they went to the grocery store to buy rice, oil, salt, vinegar, pots and pans. They also bought a caddy of streaky pork and went home to make a sumptuous dinner. It was Ning Ke's job to carry the vegetables, cook, and wash the dishes. During this process, Sang Sang just followed him with her hands behind her back. Sometimes she looked at him, and sometimes she looked at the sky. Ning Ke squatted in front of the basin and washed the dishes. He felt that this work was even harder than when he killed the horse gang. After a while, he felt sore all over. Looking at Sang Sang at the door with her hands behind her back, he could not help but get annoyed. "I can't beat you now, so I'll just do more housework. It's fine if you don't want to help." Hao Yan, of course, is honorable. How can he be involved in such matters? "It's fine if you just watch from the side, but can I trouble you with one thing? Can you not put your hands behind your back?" He complained. "You're like a leader inspecting your work. It hurts my enthusiasm." Sang Sang ignored him and walked into the room. She looked around with her hands behind her back and said, "I want tea." God said, "Let there be light," so there was light in the world. Sang Sang was the god of this world. If she said tea, there would be tea. She could make countless kinds of good tea, but for some reason, she wanted Ning Ke to buy them. Ning Ke was indeed a little tired, but also happy, because he knew that Song Song's behavior proved that she had a deeper connection with the human world. She was becoming more and more like a human. That night, he knocked on the door of the largest tea house in Chaoyang City and bought 74 kinds of the most famous tea from each country with 2 taels of silver. At the same time, he packed several sets of expensive tea sets. After drinking tea for 3 days, Sang Sang suddenly said, "I want to play chess." So Ning Ke searched everywhere for the best chess sets. But this time, it was more troublesome to satisfy Song Song's request, because chess always needed an opponent. "You're too weak." Sang Sang looked at the white pieces on the chessboard and said to him. As a man, what he hated most was losing to his woman in chess or cards. Ning Ke was already in a bad mood at this time. Hearing this, he was even more annoyed. We lowly human beings are no match for the almighty Hao Ian. This was Song Song's most common evaluation of human beings, but sounded bitter coming from his mouth. Song Song's expression didn't change. She said, "Human beings are indeed lowly, but some people are relatively better. Chun Pippi is much better than you in this aspect." As a man, what he really hated most was to be judged by his own woman as inferior to another man, even if that man was a good brother who had gone through thick and thin with him. Ning Ke said angrily, "I can't get him from Lincoln City." Sang Sang said, "Then you have to think of another way." The next day, the 3 most famous chess players in Chaoyang City were invited to the small courtyard by Ning Quebec. Or rather, kidnapping was more appropriate. In addition to drinking tea, playing chess, and listening to plays, Ning Ke and Sang Sang would sometimes go to Chaoyang City to see the White Tower and walk by the lake. She still habitually put her hands behind her back. Dozens of days passed peacefully like this. They seemed to be looking for something in Chaoyang City, but in fact, they were looking for nothing. They didn't ask where to go or what to do. They only asked what to eat the next day. One night, Ning Ke peeled a mangosteen and put the white kernel in front of Song Song's face. He laughed and said, "Doesn't this look like a butt?" Sang Sang rarely showed any expression on her face. He had always been a little unwilling. This time he also failed. Sang Sang looked at him quietly for a long time. Suddenly, she said, "Are we greedy?" Ning Ke was silent for a moment. He put the mangosteen in his hand into her mouth. Then he walked to the courtyard and played a set of bladesmanship. He fetched some water from a stream and took a bath. He said, "I'm going to sleep." Sang Sang sat by the table and looked at the tree outside the window. She didn't say anything. She used to want to return to Hao Ian's divine kingdom because it was her mission. As long as she got rid of Buddha and killed Ning Ke, she could go back. But she and Ning Ke were born together. If Ning Ke died, she would die too. It would be Hao Ian who returned to the divine kingdom. She would no longer have the name Sang Sang. She would no longer be herself. She wanted to continue being herself. She wanted to continue having the name Sang Sang. What made her even angrier and more uneasy was that she actually wanted to continue living with him in the small courtyard like this. Green vegetables, fat meat, white rice, tea, and chess games were not a bad experience. So she didn't think about Buddha, the academy, Taoism, the divine kingdom, or the human world. As long as these days continued, she would continue to be herself, and she would continue to have him by her side. Yes, she was really greedy. Ning Ke once asked outside Chang'an, "How can there be a perfect way in the world? I won't let Chang'an down or let you down." In fact, he knew that there was no such perfect way in the world. He was not afraid of death. He could actually threaten Sang Sang to go to Chang, and with suicide, and then the academy would use the God-stunning array to suppress her. Neither the Buddhism sect nor Taoism sect could do anything about it, but he was reluctant. So he took her to live in this small courtyard in Chaoyang City, ignoring what was happening in the human world. He didn't think about the academy or Buddha. He didn't think about anything. Yes, he was also very greedy. He was greedy for a moment of pleasure. After that night's conversation, Ning Ke and Sang Sang never talked about this again. The ordinary life in the human world went on peacefully. They had been in Chaoyang City for half a year, and the outside world had nothing to do with them. Chaoyang City was very lively after the beginning of spring. There were theaters everywhere. One evening, Ninkei and Sang Sang returned from the theater. They bought half a pound of pig head meat on the street and had a simple dinner. Looking at the few pieces of pig head meat left in the bowl, Sang Sang suddenly said, "There's too little food." Ninkei thought that no one would have the patience to cook a table full of food every day. He naturally changed the topic. "Cook something delicious tomorrow. By the way, did you like the play today?" Sang Sang stood up and walked out of the courtyard without any expression on her face. Ninkei was slightly startled. He put the bowl and chopsticks into the basin, wiped the water on his hands, and chased after her. Standing in the woods by the stream, she looked at the sky in silence with her hands behind her back. Ninkei looked at the fist mark on the tree and found that it had become much fainter because of the regeneration of the bark in less than half a year. Naturally, it also looked much fainter. His mood became indifferent. Was he going to leave after all? Sang Sang said, "Being together doesn't mean being together." Ninkei understood what she meant. After a moment of silence, he said, "Being together is because we should be together. It's not that I want to keep you in the human world in this way." Sang Sang did not speak for a long time. Ninkei said, "You know what I'm thinking?" Sang Sang said, "Yes, I know what you're thinking, but still greed." Ninkei looked at the side of her face and said, "Greed is not a sin." Sang Sang looked at the sky and said, "It's wrong." "What is greed?" "Love is greed. Because you like it, you will be greedy. Even a moment of greed in the human world is better than countless divine kingdoms. But a moment is too short after all. For 1,000 words, I have already written 10,000 today. I will continue to write." My leader saw that I wrote it seriously, so she did not let me accompany her to walk the dog. I like this chapter, but not the next one. I'll go to eat now. The next chapter will definitely be late. Don't worry. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 953. Ninkei looked at the fist print on the tree and asked, "What's wrong?" Sang Sang did not say anything. She walked back to the small courtyard with her hands behind her back, and he followed her. It was early spring, and the tree in the courtyard did not have many leaves. She walked to the tree and looked at the trembling branches. She said, "Since it's not true, then let me go." Since Ninkei thought that they were just living together, and it was not a way for him to keep her in the human world, then he should not stop her when she wanted to leave. "You can leave at any time," Ninkei said behind her. Sang Sang looked at the branches. Amidst the flapping of its fan, a black crow landed where she was looking. She said, "If I really want to leave, you will kill yourself." Ninkei did not say anything. Sang Sang turned around and looked at him. She asked, "Do you want me to die so badly?" This was the 6th time she said this to Ninkei, or thought of it in her heart. "I just don't want you to go." Ninkei did not avoid her eyes and said, "Even if you leave, where can you go? You have been to the human world. How can you sit in the cold divine kingdom for a long time?" Sang Sang said, "I should be there." Ninkei said, "Where is that?" "You often say that this is the world of Hao Ian, and the divine kingdom must be in this world. Then what is the difference between the divine kingdom and the human world?" Sang Sang said, "Now your teacher is there." Ninkei said, "Why do you have to stop my teacher? Why do you have to stop us? Don't you want to know what is outside this world? This is my world. I am the rule of this world. My existence comes from the unique characteristics of this world. If you want to destroy the characteristics of this world, then I cannot exist." Sang Sang looked at his eyes and said calmly, "This is the most fundamental contradiction between me, your teacher, and the academy. It cannot be solved. If you insist, you will kill me. Do you want me to die so badly?" This was the 7th time. Ninkei looked at her quietly and said, "Don't go back. Become a real person, and we will live together." Sang Sang said, "People will die." Ninkei said, "Cultivation can lead to longevity. We will cultivate together." Sang Sang said, "I want to maintain the existence of this world." Ninkei said, "I don't understand. There are obviously other ways to solve this problem. Why do you have to guard this old world? What are you guarding?" Sang Sang said, "I don't understand either. Why do you and some humans in history have to leave this world? What do you want to know?" Ning Ke said, "What we want to know is very simple. We want to know what's out there." Sang Sang said, "I don't want to know." All of her logical thinking, to be more precise, all of her life carried the objectivity of rules. If the human instinct was to yearn for freedom, then her instinct was to be self-contained and self-consistent. Ning Ke took a step forward and stood in front of her. The crow on the branch cawed coldly. He held her hand, looked in her eyes, and said, "Become human. Then we will live together, cultivate together, buy groceries together, eat together, and do many things together." Sang Sang had never looked at herself in the mirror since she came to the human world. She was not very happy with the face she made according to the most mediocre human face and the tall body she made according to her own will. So at this moment, she felt strange and confused when she looked at the woman in Ning Ke's eyes. "Why do you want to do this? Even if it's for human beings, and of course, most importantly for me, please stay." In Sang Sang's eyes, the ordinary face in his eyes suddenly shattered into countless pieces of light and shadow, unable to gather together again. So her eyes returned to indifference. "No." She looked at Ning Ke and said calmly, "Countless years ago, human beings chose me and woke me up from the chaos. They wanted me to bring them eternal peace." Ning Ke didn't know what to say. He didn't understand why his words made her react so violently. He thought it was the choice of human beings that made her wake up, but after hearing her next words, he realized it was because of him. Now I can understand that imagination and curiosity about the outside world are instinctive desires of human beings. But those people don't include you, because you are not from this world. Sang Sang looked at him and said, "You come from outside the world, so you know very well what the outside world is like. You have been telling me about that world since 20 years ago. I haven't forgotten it, and I can clearly see the picture of that world in your consciousness." Ning Ke felt his body gradually become cold. He said, "That world is very beautiful and full of vitality. There are countless real suns, and it is full of warmth." "You are lying." Sang Sang's voice was still so calm, without any extra emotion. But her words were like thunder exploding in the sky above Chaoyang City. Countless people were shocked and looked up at the sky. "Your world is full of danger. The burning sun may explode at any time, and it may go out at any time. Most of the places are as cold as the netherworld. Be it the weak, ordinary people or the stronger cultivators, none of them can survive in that world." Ning Ke said, "The life of a star is hundreds of millions of years. How can it explode at any time? I admit that most of the places are cold, but that world is really big, and it can always find a suitable place." Sang Sang said, "Even hundreds of millions of years is just a very short time for life that needs eternal life. Not to mention that your world will eventually go to nirvana, and nothing will be left." Ning Ke was silent for a long time, and then said, "Or there will be some memories left?" Sang Sang's words left no room for warmth. "There is no temperature, and there is nothing. Nirvana is the end. There is no eternity, and that is the greatest horror." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "It's not like that. I admit that you are right. The outside world may really go to nirvana, but in the long years before that, life can walk to the edge of the world or directly break the world and find the way to a new world." Sang Sang said, "What if it can't be found?" Ning Ke didn't know why he was a little angry. He said in a low voice, "You have never lived in that world. How can you be sure that human beings can't find a new world?" "Because I am not a human being. I never deceive myself as a comfort." Sang Sang looked at him and said calmly, "Compared to my world, the outside world is more like the netherworld. What you want to do will make me think of you as the son of Yama." Ning Ke hadn't heard of the son of Yama for a long time. Many years ago, including some people in the great divine priest of light, had been guessing that he was the son of Yama. Later, the title fell on Long Qing for a short time, and finally Sang Sang took over the name. Now he naturally knew that there was no Yama, and Hao Ian was Yama. But at the same time, he had to admit that Sang Sang was right to some extent. The world he had lived in was so cold, so turbulent, and so dangerous compared to this world, just like the kingdom of Yama. He came here from that world, brought the information of that world here, and strengthened the belief of the academy and the headmaster of the academy. If the Haotian world was really broken and went to a wider universe, but was eventually destroyed, then his arrival would bring the shadow of Yama to this world. This speculation made him very cold, and he subconsciously became angry. He looked at Sang Sang and shouted, "You always want to win in everything, even in a discussion. You have never admitted defeat, not even once. Why?" Sang Sang looked at him quietly with a slightly pitiful expression. Her expression made him even angrier. He walked to the tree and slapped it heavily. The black crow on the branch looked down at him, but didn't fly away, nor did it make an unpleasant sound. "It's been so many years. Ever since you could speak, I've always listened to you. In other people's eyes, you're my little handmaiden who serves me every day. When I say go east, you don't dare to go west. When I say eat dry rice, you don't dare to boil the rice. But you should know very well what the real situation is. Before I say go east, you look to the east first. When I say eat dry rice, that's because you poured out the leftover porridge the night before." Ninkei turned to look at her and shouted angrily. "In Min Mountain, I risked my life to catch a deer. You just looked at me, and I let it go. When you were 8 years old in the city of Wei, the fat aunt proposed marriage for you on behalf of her distant nephew. You were not happy, and I almost killed that boy that night. You said you wanted to go back to Chang'an, so I went back. You said you wanted to sell your calligraphy, so I wrote for sale. You said you wanted to rent the shop on Lin 14th Street, so I rented it. In the end, I almost sold my life to Chow Xiao Shu. For you, I slapped Long Qing's face swollen. Just because he used you to threaten me, I didn't care if I offended the West Hill Divine Palace or caused trouble for the Academy. I directly shot him into an idiot. Well, I was chased by Yi Hong Yu like a dog. And this broken place." He pointed to the small courtyard, looked at her, and said in a trembling voice, "Was it fun to turn yourself into the daughter of Yama? For me, it was really not fun at all. The whole world wanted to kill you, and I was the only one who carried you on my back. I was really scared at that time. I couldn't beat them, did you know that? But I still fought them, didn't I?" Sang Sang did not speak, but just looked at him quietly. "I have never disobeyed your opinion. I will do whatever you want, and I will not hurt you. There is no such possibility in my mind. It has been like this since the day I found you in Hebei province. I pity you, I love you, and I value you more than my own life." Ning Kei's voice gradually became lower, but his emotions became more agitated. He said, "Because I was also abandoned by the whole world at that time. At that time, only you were by my side. You survived because of me, and I survived because I had to support you. What is natal? This is natal." Sang Sang looked up at the sky, which was gradually being invaded by the darkness, and did not speak. The black crow, perched on the branch, slightly tilted its head to look at the two people in the courtyard, as if it wanted to figure out the current situation. "Youngest uncle was killed by you, but I was not born at that time, so I could ignore it. But I can no longer say that I have nothing to do with my teacher's death." Ning Kei's voice became a little hoarse, very low, and very tired, as if he would collapse at any time. She did not know whether it was because he had talked too much or because he was too emotional. "At that time by the Sisui River, I could have stopped you because you were my natal, but I didn't. I thought it was because I forgot, but later I found out that I didn't. It was just that I instinctively let myself forget it, because I was really afraid of your death." He looked up at the stars in the night sky and the moon that was about to appear. After a moment of silence, he continued, "I have never told anyone about this. But in fact, everyone knows about it. Even the senior brothers and sisters in the academy know about it. But they have never mentioned it. For you, I can give up everything. I can be shameless. I can give up my life, not to mention loyalty, righteousness, honor, and morality. If it was in the past, I could kill everyone in the world for you. As long as you are alive, as long as you are well, I don't care what others think of me, how they talk about me, how they laugh at me, how they hate me, and how they are afraid of me." Ning Kei looked back at her and said with tears in his eyes, "But not this time. My senior brothers and sisters in the academy, and those people in Chong, and They're very good to me and also to you. If I let you go back, my teacher will die, the Tang Empire will be destroyed, and there will be no academy in the world. So I can't listen to you." The moon finally appeared in the night sky, just behind him, but it was not bright because the moon waxed and waned. The moon tonight was so dim, as if it could be extinguished at any time. "I will die too." When Ning Ke spoke, Sang Sang had been silent until now. She looked at him and said calmly, "If it weren't for the academy and you, I wouldn't have been forced into such a mess by those monks in the Xiankong temple. You should know that I am getting weaker day by day. If you don't let me go back to the divine kingdom, I will die one day. Don't talk about becoming a real human and then cultivating. I have said that I don't like to deceive myself. I am Hao Ian. How can I become a human? If I become a human, will I still be who I am now? How can you guarantee that I will be alive?" The headmaster of the academy was the first person in the world of Hao Ian for tens of thousands of years. Hao Ian's coming to the human world was also something that had never happened in history. As for him, the guest from the outside world, he was even more special. No one knew the final ending of the story written by the three of them. Hao Ian didn't know, the headmaster didn't know, and Ning Ke didn't know either. So he couldn't answer this question. He could only walk to the door of the kitchen and turn back to ask her, "Shall I cook a bowl of noodles for you?" Sang Sang looked at him quietly. There was no disappointment in her eyes, only indifference. "I have no appetite." After saying this, she walked back to the bedroom and covered herself with the quilt. Like a child who was angry, she pulled the quilt up high to cover her face, as if it would make her feel better. After a while, Ning Ke walked into the bedroom, lifted the quilt, and helped her up. She said, I don't want to eat noodles." Ning Ke said, "Warm your feet before you sleep." Sang Sang then saw a pot of hot water in front of the bed. Ning Ke squatted down and took off her shoes. He tested the water temperature and found that it was just right. He put her white feet in the water and carefully washed them, not even the gaps between her toes. It was a quiet night. Sang Sang didn't get up when she woke up in the morning. Instead, she continued to lie on the bed and look at the roof. A spider web was formed on the clean beam, and the spider waited quietly at the edge of the web. When an insect bumped into the web, it would crawl over and kill the food in the most enthusiastic way, and then greedily suck the delicious juice. "We can't go on like this. We need to make a decision." She turned sideways and looked at Ning Ke's face. She said, "If you don't let me go, I will kill everyone." Ning Ke rubbed his eyes and said, "There is no rice left. Remind me to buy a bag of rice when you buy vegetables." They cooked a pot of porridge with the remaining rice in the rice jar. After they finished it, they went to the market. They went to the rice shop first. When Ning Ke was about to pay, he suddenly found that there was a head in the bag of rice. It was the head of the rice shop owner. Blood seeped out of the bag. As for the rice in the bag, it had long been dyed red. It looked like the blood rice of the kingdom of Qi, and it gave off a disgusting smell of blood. The shop assistants and the women who bought rice screamed at the scene and rushed out of the shop. However, they became dead before they could step over the threshold. Hao Ian had countless ways to kill a person. She could make a person die quietly, with a happy expression, as if he was still sleeping and in the sweetest dream. But obviously, Sang Sang did not choose this method. In order to make Ning Ke feel more direct and show her determination, she used a very bloody method. The rice shop was full of broken limbs. Ning Ke looked at her with a pale face. He wanted to say something, but he could not. He walked out of the rice shop and did not dare to buy vegetables again. He lowered his head and walked quickly between the stalls. No matter how those familiar vegetable sellers called him, he ignored them and even forgot that he was still carrying a bag of rice stained with blood. Sang Sang did not want to let him go, although he did not do anything. As he moved, the vegetable stalls he passed turned into a pool of blood. Those vegetable sellers died miserably. Enough! Ning Ke stopped at the entrance of the market. The street in front of him was full of people. He did not dare to take another step forward. He could only turn around and shout at Sang Sang angrily. There was blood everywhere in the market. It had already reached the soles of his shoes. Sang Sang walked in the sea of blood without any emotion on her face. Looking at this scene, Ning Ke's body trembled. Then he gradually calmed down. His pale face was full of exhaustion. He looked at Sang Sang and said, "It doesn't work on me." Sang Sang said, "I want to try. Besides, what if it was a Tang who died?" Ninkei did not say anything. He began to feel nervous, because she had already thought. Thought was anger. Anger was anger. And anger came from different places. 4 chapters, 15,000 words completed. I wish everyone a happy weekend. I'm a little tired from writing, but I am satisfied with the content, so I am in a good mood. Please vote for me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 954. Anger came from different perspectives, different names, and different nature of life. Tofu pudding was salty or sweet, zongzi was meat or vegetable, and life or death. You want to kill people just because of different choices? You know I'm cold-blooded. You killing the Tangs will make me angry and sad, but it won't change my mind. Ninkei looked at the market that had become a sea of blood and the broken limbs around the stall. He said, "You were chosen by human beings. Without human beings, you wouldn't have appeared. You can't treat them like this." Sang Sang frowned and said, "It was human beings' choice that I woke up. Do I have to let them decide my life and death? Can parents decide their children's life and death?" Ninkei said, "No one wants you to die." She said calmly and firmly, "When I was born in the human world, I was secretly sent out of the mansion by that housekeeper. She wanted to drown me in a cesspool. It was also on that day in the woodshed that another housekeeper approached you with a hatchet. My life and death were almost decided by someone else, and so were yours. In the end, you snatched the hatchet. After I survived, I didn't want my life and death to be decided by someone else." Ninkei was silent for a moment and said, "Yes, life and death can only be decided by oneself." Sang Sang said, "I don't want to die as long as I'm alive." Ninkei's anger gradually turned into confusion. He didn't know how to calm her down. Her slightly trembling hands could kill people, and her thoughts could also kill people. He walked through the sea of blood and came to her. He reached out to hold her hand and gently pulled her into his arms. Then he hugged her tightly and sadly said in her ear, "I don't want you to die either." Song Song's body was a little stiff and then gradually softened. She clumsily leaned on his shoulder. Because they were about the same height, it looked a little uncoordinated. "I'd rather die than you." The two stood between the sea of blood and the broken bodies and held each other tightly. They looked calm and even sacred. Countless light spots flew out from them like stars and floated in all directions. As the light spots fell, the sticky blood on the ground of the market gradually faded until it was invisible. The bodies and the blood also disappeared, as if they had been purified by the divine. The pungent smell of blood could no longer be smelled in the market. There was only the smell of chicken feces, the earthy smell of river fish, the touching smell of onions, and the unique smell of vegetables. There was still dew on the green vegetables, which made them look extremely alluring. The newly unearthed tender bamboo shoots were arranged neatly and even had some dirt on them. They didn't look dirty, but looked extremely beautiful. The market was filled with shouts and haggling sounds. Mothers were beating their children, puppies were fighting over bones, and wildcats were startled. "Pa, pa, woof, woof, meow." It was a noisy mess. 2 copper coins for this scallion isn't expensive, right? Ninkei opened his eyes and saw that the Annie was holding out a handful of tender green onions in front of him. Her face was full of pride, as if she thought that Ninkei wouldn't feel embarrassed if he didn't buy it. He shook his head with a smile and patted Sang Sang in his arms to wake her up. Then he took her hand and walked out of the market. He didn't have any rice or vegetables in his hands, but he wasn't worried that there would be nothing to eat in the courtyard. As long as there is love, drinking water will fill one's stomach. Sang Sang didn't leave. She and Ninkei continued to live an ordinary life in Chaoyang City, hiding from the wind and rain outside, walking between the courtyard and the market, and strolling by the stream. Ninkei was in charge of cooking, and Sang Sang was in charge of eating. Occasionally, when she was in a good mood, she would cook a bowl of fried egg noodles for Ning Quebec. There were still 4 Sichuan peppercorns and 30 chopped green onions in the clear soup. If you wanted to avoid boredom and boredom, you had to find ways to find new interests, see new sights, or relive old times from time to time. Ninkei was very smart. Relying on the taste in his memory, he successfully taught himself the hot and sour sliced noodle soup. According to Song Song's expression, the taste was at least 70% as good as the one at Lin 47th Street. He buried 2 jars of yellow wine under the tree in the courtyard and made a jar of pickles in the kitchen. The jar was stuffed with milk, tender ginger, and green and red peppers. Anyone would drool when he opened the lid. Sang Sang was very satisfied with the pickles he made, but for some reason, she still liked to eat the simplest cabbage head and vinegar the most. They often left the hospital for a walk, watching the sunset over the lake, listening to the bell in the temple, and strolling around Chaoyang City. It was as if they had become lazy like this lazy city. In the spring rain, they visited the legendary 72 temples. In the autumn, they went to some other big cities in the Yuelin Kingdom. In the cold snow, they went to the north. They spent the whole night in the bleak scenery of the Blue Pass. They held hands while they were doing these things. Perhaps it was because of the long walk. Sang Sang was a little tired and went to sleep when they returned to the small courtyard. From that day on, she became a little drowsy and slept longer and longer. When she slept, Ning Kei would lie beside her and read. He would hold her hand under the quilt with one hand while holding the book. Sometimes he would forget to put his hand back after turning a page. Sang Sang, who was sound asleep, would subconsciously reach out and pull his hand back under the quilt, holding it tightly in front of her chest and refusing to let go. On a certain autumn day, Chaoyang City was talking about the high monk of the White Tower Temple releasing animals. Ning Kei heard that after several buckets of loaches and various fish were thrown into the lake, there would be a very funny and bloody scene. He thought it was very interesting and wanted to take Sang Sang to see it. She was a little tired and did not want to leave the hospital, so she went by herself. The release was indeed very lively. Those loaches, eels, and various fishes killed each other, and it was really bloody. What those eminent monks did was really funny. Ning Kei was about to go home after watching it, when he suddenly had a strange feeling. Looking at the lake and the white tower on the other side of the lake, he always felt that something was missing. The dense crowd of believers and tourists gradually dispersed. As the dusk deepened, the White Tower Temple gradually became quiet. He stood on the shore and looked at the tower in silence. That feeling was still lingering. At this moment, the bell for the evening class rang in the temple. This bell rang in his heart at the same time. The Buddhist bell could clear the heart and help believers meditate. Ning Kei had the fragments of lotus consciousness deep in his sense of perception, so he could naturally sense it more clearly. He subconsciously walked to the depths of the temple. Following the bell, he came to the front of the main hall of the White Tower Temple. He saw hundreds of monks chanting devoutly inside the threshold. With the chanting, the statue of Buddha in the hall seemed more and more merciful. Buddha was quietly looking at him. When the chanting entered his ears, it was the sound of Buddha. It was extremely beautiful. Ning Kei stood outside the threshold and gradually became obsessed. In the small courtyard, Sang Sang woke up. The black crow on the branch cawed strangely and flew away. Her eyes followed the black crow and fell on the sky. She felt that the sky was a little familiar and very beautiful. She looked at it for a long time and gradually became obsessed. Obsession arose from love. There was no wise man in love. Love did not know why. Obsession was stupidity. It is said that it is a supermoon today. The headmaster must be in a very good state, but I am in a very bad state. It is not because I'm tired of writing 5 chapters yesterday, but because I plucked up the courage to eat a fish hot pot tonight. I'm a little anxious and always feel that some joints are aching. Of course, I know this is not true. I am not as stupid as Ning Kei and Sang Sang, but I am timid. And with the 2,000 words today, I just finished writing greed, anger, and obsession. It feels like I have completed a very difficult task. I relaxed and found it hard to lift my spirits. Today is only 2,000 words. I will write slowly, but I don't know if I can finish it. In order to avoid wasting time, I will tell you in advance that even if I finish it, I will publish it tomorrow. Do you think it is possible for me to write some drafts? It seems difficult. Tomorrow will definitely continue. I have fallen in love with the rhythm of 15:15. Maybe it is because I have said it too much when I was a child, but I will never do something like 15:15. There will be 5 chapters tomorrow. It happens to be Monday, so I sincerely ask for recommendation votes. Student Yunkai asked me to write a single chapter to get votes. I have been thinking about it. It is not easy to endure for dozens of days. Although it is really painful to endure, should I endure it? Maybe I can't endure it tomorrow or the day after. Then we will talk about it. Thank you for your support. I am still full of energy and the quality of the article is good. Please vote for me. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 955. A monk walked out of the hall. The monk was not very old. His face was dark, and he was slightly plump. The distance between his eyes was a little far, and he looked a little silly, or perhaps naive. However, his eyes were extremely clear. The monk was holding a white and fat steam bun in his hand and chewing it all the way. His face was full of joy. He didn't see the road clearly and bumped into Ning, Quebec. Ouch. The monk rubbed his head and brushed his fingers over the scars. His left hand was still holding the steamed bun so tightly that his fingers sank into the white and soft bun. His eyes were full of tears. It seemed that he was really in pain. The monk bumped into him because he didn't see the road clearly. It had nothing to do with Ning, Quebec. But somehow, Ning Ke felt pity for the monk and apologized gently. The monk looked at Ning Ke's face and was suddenly stunned. He forgot the pain and suddenly became happy. He put the steamed bun in front of Ning Ke and said with a smile, "My treat." Ning Ke was surprised and asked, "Why do you want to treat me?" The monk said, "Because you look like me. My master said that I am a good person, so you are also a good person." Ning Ke looked at his silly face and thought, "How do I look like you?" He asked, "Who are you?" The monk answered honestly, "My name is King Banzi." Ning Ke looked at his expression and tone and knew that his mind was probably not fully developed. So he asked casually, "Where do you come from, King Banzi?" Monk Ching Ban refused to answer. He raised the steamed bun higher and almost touched Ning Ke's mouth. Ning Ke understood and took the steamed bun from his hand and took a bite. Monk Ching Ban clapped his hands happily and took Ning Ke's hand to a certain place on the temple wall. He pointed at the moss-covered stone steps outside a side door and said, "I come from here." Ning Ke looked at the stone steps and vaguely understood that this person was probably an abandoned baby who was abandoned by his relatives and thrown on the stone steps outside the White Tower Temple. Then he was taken in by the monks in the temple and grew up like this. "Why do you say that I look like you?" He asked curiously. Monk Ching Ban pursed his lips and said shyly, "My master said that I am an idiot with innate wisdom. My brothers in the temple also said that I am an idiot. You looked like an idiot before, so of course you have the innate wisdom." Ning Ke thought that the eminent monk Lotus was in his consciousness, so of course he had the innate wisdom. But the monks in the temple said that Ching Ban was an idiot. What did it have to do with innate wisdom? Monk Ching Ban was so naive and naive. Ning Ke naturally wouldn't say these things to add to his worries. So he let the monk hold his hand and wander in the temple. The bell in the temple rang far away, and Ning Ke gradually calmed down. The strange feeling he had when he saw the white tower and the water shadow by the lake gradually disappeared, which made him feel very comfortable. In the meditation room of the side hall of the temple, Monk Ching Ban took out more than 300 Buddhist scriptures left by his master and showed them to Ning Ke, just like a child showing off his treasures to his friends. Ning Ke didn't want to disappoint him, so he picked up a Buddhist scripture and began to read it. He praised it from time to time. Monk Ching Ban was scratching his ears and cheeks with joy. There was a true meaning in the scripture. Ning Ke just praised it casually, but after reading it, he found it was really interesting. He gradually immersed himself in it and forgot to go back. When he woke up, it was already late at night. He felt very uneasy and quickly got up. He woke up Monk Ching Ban, who had fallen asleep on the futon and left the White Tower Temple and walked back to the small courtyard. The reason why he felt uneasy was that he was so greedy for Buddhist scriptures that he forgot to cook dinner. Now, the most important thing for Sang Sang was to eat and sleep. What would she think of him? Sang Sang was not in the small courtyard, but under a tree by the stream outside. Hearing Ning Kei's footsteps, she didn't turn around to look at him. Instead, she continued to look at the sky, and the small white flower in her hair trembled in the night wind. Ning Kei walked to her side and expressed his sincerest apologies for forgetting to cook dinner today. Sang Sang was in a good mood because she had been looking at the sky for a whole day. The sky was so beautiful that she had long forgotten to eat, so she showed her tolerance to Ning Quebec. That night, after dinner in the courtyard, Ning Kei talked about what he had seen and heard in the White Tower Temple today. He mentioned the silly monk Qing Ban and said, "Would you like to go with me tomorrow? It's always good to have some new friends." Sang Sang said like an ordinary housewife, but she didn't agree to go with him to the White Tower Temple tomorrow. She wanted to stay in the courtyard and look at the sky. The sky was so beautiful that she couldn't get enough of it. In the following days, apart from accompanying her to wander around the city, Ning Kei spent most of his time in the White Tower Temple. He talked with monk Qingban, listened to the bell, and read the Buddhist scriptures, and felt quite peaceful. Sometimes he would bring back some vegetarian food for Sang Sang to eat, but Sang Sang did not like it. Sang Sang was still sleepy. When she woke up, she would look at the sky from morning to dusk. Under the tree and by the stream, she quietly looked at the sky. She felt that the sky was beautiful, but also a little strange. One day, Ning Kei said that she could also look at the sky in the White Tower Temple. Sang Sang thought it was very reasonable, so she followed him to the White Tower Temple. Although she didn't like the vegetarian food and the monks in the temple, she thought that the lake was very beautiful, and the sky reflected in the lake was also very beautiful. So she began to sit by the lake and look at the sky. The days went on like this. Ning Kei and Sang Sang looked at the lake, the sky, and the Buddhist scriptures in the morning bell and the evening drum. They were calm and happy. Time passed slowly, and gradually they didn't know how long they had been. The bright bell reverberated among the peaks and in hundreds of temples, waking up many monks. Compared with the melodious and distant bell in the Shinkong temple in the past, today's bell seemed so strong and even a little anxious because it was a warning. The bell transmitted countless messages and also pointed out the direction. More than 100 soldier monks walked out of the Yellow Temple on the west peak and rushed down the peak. They changed horses at the foot of the mountain and turned into a cloud of dust, riding along the mountain road to somewhere in the dark underground field at high speed. Their monk robes fluttered in the wind, and their momentum was shocking. The vast underground field had always seemed so quiet in the past countless years. But today, somewhere in the field, the sound of killing had already shaken the sky. Smoke and dust were everywhere, and the sound of shouting and the sound of weapons colliding could be heard everywhere. Among them, there were also the sad chanting of scriptures, which was very strange. The former Buddhist land had become a battlefield, and the once devout believers had already become bloodthirsty Ajuras. However, if killing was a sin, in fact, this place had always been a Shiraba. More than 100 soldier monks came to the periphery of the bloody battlefield with iron sticks in their hands and slowly stopped. Their horses gradually parted, and 4 monks wearing bamboo hats came out. The leading monk had a plain face and a determined expression. Even the shadow of the bamboo hat could not hide the tranquility in his eyes. He was Qin Yin, the world wayfarer of Buddhism. The other 3 monks wearing bamboo hats looked very old, and they were all the elders of the Commandment Hall of the Shinkong Temple. Qin Yin quietly looked at the battlefield, but his eyes passed through the smoke and dust raised by the hooves of the horses and fell on the cliff far away. There were people on the cliff, and he was responsible for the world under the cliff. The nobles of dozens of tribes were armed and united. After dozens of days of desperate fighting, they finally stopped the slaves in front of the meadow beside the abandoned gold field. The Shinkong Temple had also sent powerful soldier monks and strong cultivators. Logically speaking, the outcome of the war had already been decided. But Qin Yin still felt a little uneasy because he always felt that that person would not admit defeat so easily. The rebellion of the serfs in the underground field had lasted for a year. In the beginning, The rebellion was just a riot of shepherds of a poor tribe by the cliff, and more than a dozen people were killed. The tribe tried to suppress it by force, and even invited a monk who was punished by the commandment hall to the holy mountain. Unexpectedly, the armed forces of the nobles of the tribe were all killed in the suppression, and the monk did not survive. The Shinkong Temple still did not care much. They had ruled the underground world for countless generations, and the monks in the temple had long been used to it. Every few years, there would be descendants of sinners who would forget the mercy of the Buddha and ungratefully try to get treatment that they were not qualified to get. But no matter how fierce the sinners were at the beginning, in the end, they only needed to send a few monks to suppress them, and they could also prove to the believers how powerful the holy mountain was. So why not? But the serfs' rebellion this time was very different from the countless rebellions in the past. The nobles gathered 200 cavalrymen to suppress the sinners made up of more than 100 sick and weak shepherds, but they still did not succeed. So they gathered more troops, but they still did not succeed. In the end, the nobles sent 1,000 cavalrymen and even invited professional slave hunters, but they still did not succeed. The encirclement and suppression of the rebels never stopped, but not only did they not succeed, but the ranks of the rebels grew larger and larger, and several wandering ascetic monks died in the battle. News of this rebel army began to spread in the underground world, along with the legend that the rebel army had found the way to the true Elysium. Their innate desire for freedom and their innate hatred for suffering and inequality caused the rebel army to gain more and more sympathizers, and some even began to respond to them. Similar to the rebellion of the Cliffside tribe, the rebellions of other tribes in the underground world were often initiated by shepherds. Those who lived between heaven and earth for generations, accompanied by cattle and sheep, and were relatively free to migrate, had the strongest desire for freedom and the firmest resistance against exploitation. More and more people joined the rebellion, and the wilderness of the underground world became more and more chaotic. The order that had been maintained in the Buddhist kingdom for thousands of years began to be threatened, especially as more wandering ascetic monks were killed by the rebels. The Shinkong Temple could no longer watch calmly as before. The monks of the Shinkong Temple were practitioners, and for the serfs in the underground world, they were the living Buddhas who used to worship. Whether in terms of spirit or strength, the appearance of these monks was the most fatal blow to the rebellious serfs. In a very short time, most of the rebellions in the underground world were suppressed. However, some things were difficult to end once they started, some ideas were difficult to extinguish once they were born, and some bonfires were difficult to extinguish once they were lit. The fire of rebellion in the meadow seemed to be about to be extinguished, but who knew how many sparks were hidden under the weeds? A few months later, dozens of rebellions of various sizes occurred in the underground world. After suppressing one, the monks of the Shinkong Temple had to rush to another. What made them tired and helpless was that every time they finished suppressing a rebellion, a new one would occur. A single spark could start a prairie fire. Something happened and affected me. I must finish the 5 chapters today, but please understand that I don't have the time and energy to revise it. It may be rough. To be continued. If you like this work, please come come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 956. The rebellion spread like wildfire and had affected nearly 1/3 of the tribes. The rebel army, which started the rebellion and was also the strongest now, had more than 4,000 people. This rebel army was so strong that it took them a whole year to fight from the remote cliff to a place less than 200 miles away from the giant peak. Although the foundation of the Buddha kingdom seemed to be not really shaken, the Shinkong Temple had already felt a strong sense of danger. The monks could not allow the rebels to climb up to the divine mountain. Qin Yin, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect, was also a super powerful person in the Shinkong Temple. Since the rebellion became more and more popular, he had been guarding the mountain path that people had to pass through to reach the peak. He was like someone who was guarding the pass in front of the Verdant Canyon. However, as the rebel army approached, he could no longer sit still. Qin Yin knew the biggest difference between this rebellion and the countless rebellions in the past years. In the past, the rebellion in the underground world was only the instinctive anger of the serfs. But in this rebellion, the serfs were very clear about what they wanted. That was why they were so determined and brave. Someone brought hope to the serfs and pointed them a clear direction. At the same time, that person stood with the serfs and always rushed to the front on the battlefield. Thinking of that person's name, Qin Yin's expression became serious, and his eyes under the shadow of the bamboo hat became more determined. It was because he knew that that person was in the rebel army that he left the peak and came to this battlefield. He knew that the 3 elders of the Commandment Hall might not be able to stop that person. Facing that person, no matter how cautious the Xiankong Temple was, it was not an exaggeration. Qin Yin was even sure that if the chief monk was not indifferent on the cliff plateau, he would definitely take action himself. In the distant battlefield full of smoke and dust, the wildest sounds of fighting burst out. Qin Yin woke up from his meditation and looked at that place in silence. He knew that today's battle was about to end. As dusk came, several tribes lost nearly 1,000 people to stop the rebellious slaves at the other end of the meadow. Howls and groans could be heard everywhere in the wilderness. The battle temporarily stopped. Qin Yin and the other monks looked at the distant meadow with mixed feelings. In the camp of the rebellious serfs, there were a dozen very simple tents. The old people were treating the injured young people. There was smoke rising from the side of the tents. There was a big pot on the fire. They should be cooking mutton. In front of the tent, in the middle, many people could be seen sitting there, as if they were listening to someone. The night in the underground world was longer than in the temples on the peak. Compared to the real world on the ground, it was even longer and a little tiresome. But Qin Yin was not tired. He stood quietly in the wilderness until the stars disappeared and the morning light shone again. Then he led the monks to the battlefield. More than a dozen nobles in luxurious clothes knelt on the meadow. They looked excited and awestruck. They did not dare to look up. For them, those who came down from the divine mountain were real Buddhas. The cavalrymen had already woken up. They were washing and eating with the help of the slaves. Voices also came from the camp of the rebels in the distance. There were no slaves there, but there were old people, women, and children. This rebel army had fought from the edge of the cliff all the way to the front of the peak. They had always brought the old, the sick, the disabled, and the orphans of their own clan. From a military point of view, it was stupid and also very daunting. Qin Yin walked to the front. The nobles kept kissing the footprints left by him with devout fanaticism. He did not pay attention to them and quietly looked at the distant meadow. The elder of the Commandment Hall, standing on his right, looked at the meadow in the morning light and the slaves in shabby clothes who looked happy. He did not know why he suddenly felt extremely angry. All the sinners will go to hell. Following this cruel verdict, the fierce battle began once again. Thousands of cavalrymen gathered by several large tribes charged towards the rebel army. The cavalrymen on horseback brandished their snow-white scimitars and shouted obscenities. Their bloodshot eyes were filled with cruelty. The equipment of the tribal cavalrymen was naturally many times better than those of the rebel serfs. Especially the more than 200 cavalrymen in the front. They were fully armored, which formed a sharp contrast with the enemy. The sound of hooves was like a storm, and the blades were as bright as the sun. The tribal cavalrymen rushed to the wilderness hundreds of feet away from the serfs. Their battle cries seemed to shake the sky. A rain of arrows fell. With the eyesight of the monks of the Xiankong Temple, they could clearly see that there were only dozens of archers in the rebel serfs. And the bows and arrows in their hands were so simple. Some of the arrows did not even have tail feathers. Who could be hit by such arrows? Even if they could, how could they pierce through the armor? The elder of the Commandment Hall showed a look of pity on his face. This kind of pity was naturally sarcasm. However, Qin Yin still looked serious. He had better eyesight and clearly saw that those arrows did not have arrowheads, but prismatic stones tied to them. Suddenly, a gust of wind rose above the meadow. The wind was a bit strange because it was not unpredictable like the wind in nature. Instead, it blew straight to the tribal cavalrymen as if it had been ordered. The arrows without tail feathers could also fly in such a violent wind. They did not need to be accurate. They became faster and faster in the wind, and even became whistling arrow shadows. Bang, 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 bang. Dozens of dull sounds of impact sounded almost at the same time. The tribal cavalrymen in the front were like weeds cut by a sickle. They fell to the ground. Those cavalrymen who fell to the ground rolled in pain and kept spitting blood from their mouths. They could not get up. The next moment, they closed their eyes unwillingly. There was a clear dent on the armor of the dead cavalrymen. The rebellious serfs were short of food and clothing, and had no resources to make sharp arrowheads. Even with the help of the gust of wind, the arrows could not pierce through their armor. However, the arrows of the serfs were tied to stones. With the help of the wind, the stones fell on the armors like hammers, directly shattering the internal organs of the cavalrymen. The arrows and stones caused heavy casualties. However, there were too many of the tribal cavalrymen. The momentum of the charge was only slightly hindered, and then they continued to rush forward. Suddenly, the meadow was filled with the sound of fighting. This was a very asymmetrical battle. The tribal cavalrymen wore iron or leather armors and held sharp knives in their hands, while the serfs were dressed in rags. They were dark and thin, and their weapons were very simple. Most of them held bamboo spears, and a few serfs even held bones. Judging from the freshness of the bones, they were probably the leg bones from yesterday's pot. Equipment was indeed important in a battle, but the most important thing was always the people. The serfs had no armor or sharp knives, but they had courage, desire, and bones. Seeing the cavalrymen rushing over like iron, the serfs' faces turned pale, but they did not retreat. They raised the bamboo spears in their hands, and even though their hands were trembling like sieves, no one put them down and ran away. Pucci, the seemingly fragile bamboo spears pierced through the seemingly hard armors. Crack! The bamboo spears were broken by the huge impact of the cavalrymen. The serfs, whose hands had been shaken to the point of bleeding, screamed wildly and devoured the cavalrymen. The same scene happened everywhere around the meadow. The seemingly insufferably arrogant cavalrymen fell one after another in front of the seemingly vulnerable serfs, and were then piled to death. The cavalrymen lost their advantage in speed, and the serfs began to take advantage of their numbers. They picked up stones and brandished bones, frantically surrounded the nearest cavalrymen, and then began to smash them. They used rocks to smash the cavalry's chest armor until it was deformed, and they smashed the cavalry's head until it was deformed. They used the bone clubs in their hands to knock the cavalry unconscious, and then they smashed the other party's leg bones. The cavalry woke up from the pain again, waving the sabers in his hands randomly, and was finally smashed to death. Blood was splashed everywhere on the meadow, and the sound of broken bones and legs could be heard everywhere. The serfs were like beasts, screaming and smashing incessantly. They had lived in this gloomy wilderness for generations. They had been enslaved by the nobles and gurus. They had been smashed to death by these people with stones, and their bones and marrow were sucked out by these people. Today, it was finally their turn to smash these people to death, and it was their turn to smash these people's bones. Buddha had always talked about samsara, the cycle of cause and effect, and retribution to his disciples and believers. So this was retribution, this was cause and effect, and this was samsara. Looking at the bloody and tragic scene on the battlefield, and seeing the tribe getting more and more unfavorable situation, the eyes of the elder of the commandment hall no longer showed compassion, but only anger and coldness. Qin Yin was silent for a moment, and then said, "Buddha is merciful. Buddha is merciful." More than 100 soldier monks from the west peak of the Xiankong temple put their palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. There was no mercy in their voice, only indifference and determination. Accompanied by the chanting of Buddha, the soldier monks stabbed the iron sticks in their hands into the wilderness. It was as if a thunder had exploded in the wilderness. A strong force came from the bottom of the dense iron sticks and spread to the meadow. The wilderness was shaking, as if there was a vajra walking under the ground. More than a dozen serfs were shaken into the air and then fell heavily to the ground. They were shocked to death. Buddha is merciful. The soldier monks chanted the name of Buddha again, pulled out the iron sticks from the wilderness and rushed to the battlefield. For a moment, the shadows of the sticks were everywhere, and the monk robes were fluttering in the wind. It was indescribably solemn. The rebellious serfs who had once suddenly heard the name of Buddha and looked at the soldier monks. Their faces became very pale, and their eyes were filled with fear. For them, the soldier monks from the divine mountain were the living Buddhas. They were mortals. How could they fight against the living Buddhas? At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the tent in the middle of the meadow. It seemed to be chanting scriptures. Hearing the voice, the serfs suddenly became determined. They held the iron knives and bamboo spears and waved the bone sticks that were full of knife marks and rushed to the soldier monks. The soldier monks were chanting the name of Buddha, and the name of Buddha was like thunder. The serfs were also chanting the name of Buddha. They were repeating the name of the person in the tent. The name of Buddha was very short, and they were very familiar with it. Each word was a sentence, and each word was sonorous and powerful, like real thunder. The second chapter, and with the help of the bone stick in this chapter, I recommend a Korean movie that I like very much, Yellow Sea. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 9:57. The scripture was really short, only one sentence. The way the serfs recited the scripture was also very special, treating each word as a sentence. They would resolutely shout out the first word and then be silent. When they thought there was no more, they would shout in unison again. The thunder in the sky did the same. Hundreds of monk soldiers chanted the 4 words of Buddha's mercy. Their monk robes fluttered in the wind. Their Zen hearts were firm, but there was no mercy in their eyes. Instead, they were full of anger. Thousands of serfs chanted the scripture together and resisted the power of the Buddha's name. They regained their courage and waved the simple weapons in their hands to attack the monk soldiers. With the sound of the Buddha's name, the monk soldiers descended to the human world like Buddha. The chanting was like thunder, and the mortals were like ghosts coming out of hell. The field was stained with blood, and the battle was extremely fierce. The nobles who were watching the battle were pale. They didn't expect that these untouchables could fight so fiercely with the living Buddha from the divine mountain. The elders of the commandment hall couldn't understand why these sinners had the courage to resist the power of the Buddha's words. Looking at the world of the bloody sea in front of them, they seemed to see countless evil ghosts and asuras. Qin Yin looked extremely solemn. He had been listening to the scripture that the serfs shouted out. After a long time, he finally understood that it was not scripture at all, but a sentence. Warrior. No. Can. E. No. Home. E. It was a simple sentence with only 7 words. But the meaning of the sentence was profound enough to be remembered for 700 years. The power of the sentence was so great that it easily crushed the Buddha's words into pieces. The nobles couldn't understand it. The elders of the commandment hall couldn't understand it, and neither could Qin Yin. But he remembered one thing. He once heard from the dead Shi Mei that in front of the White Tower Temple, Mr. First of the Academy used only one sentence to break the Buddha's words of the chief preaching monk. At that time, Mr. First said, "The Master does not speak of supernatural powers and gods." At this time, Qin Yin naturally thought of the past. Could it be that the sentence that the sinners were shouting was also said by the headmaster? Even so, how could that person's Tao reach such a level? He was wrong. The words that reverberated in the wilderness and brought courage and perseverance to the serfs were not spoken by the headmaster, but by that person. These words were not said by Confucius, but were the requirements that that person had for himself, the expectations that he had for all living beings. These words contained the spirit of his life, and when 1,000 people shouted together, it was like thunder. A scholar must be resolute. At this time, the ordinary people who were fighting on the battlefield had been slaves for generations. They were not warriors, but when they said these words, they became warriors, they became noble people. Thus, they gained morale. The serfs charged towards the remaining soldiers and the living Buddha in their hearts. Their voices were like thunder. In the Buddhist scriptures, Buddha once explained the thunder in the sky as the friction or collision between clouds and the sky. In today's battlefield, the thunder was the collision between iron and iron. As the dust drifted in the meadow, an iron sword suddenly appeared. This iron sword was very straight. There was no existence in the world that could be straighter. This iron sword was very thick, so thick that it didn't seem like a sword, but more like a piece of stubborn iron. The iron sword whistled through the air and slashed down. A soldier monk raised his iron cudgel to meet the sword. With a thunderous sound, the iron cudgel suddenly shattered, and the soldier monk fell to the ground, spitting out blood. His body made countless criss-cracking sounds, and he died just like that. 10 iron cudgel broke through the air and pressed toward the iron sword like a group of mountains. The iron sword proudly lifted up. It was still only one sword, and there was only a thunderous sound. The 10 iron cudgel were like 10 pieces of straw, deformed and scattered in all directions, disappearing into the wild grass. The 10-soldier monk holding the iron cudgel were shaken away to some unknown place. There was a loud roar in the meadow. The leader of the soldier monk opened his mouth, showing his teeth and eyes, like a lion in front of the Buddha. He gathered countless chi of heaven and earth on the iron cudgel and smashed it towards the iron sword. At this moment, a hand reached out from the dust and grabbed the hilt of the iron sword. The fingers of this hand were very slender, and the palm was very thick. Holding the iron sword, there was an indescribable sense of harmony. If this sense of harmony had to be described, it would probably be completely natural. A figure vaguely appeared in the dust. That person held the iron sword, and with a casual wave, he blocked the iron cudgel of the leader of the soldier monk that was smashing down with countless chi of heaven and earth. The iron sword and iron cudgel collided, and there were sparks, thunder, and a moment of silence. The leader of the soldier monk felt a terrifying power coming from the iron cudgel. The first impression of the power was that it was very violent, but on a deeper level, it was calm and orderly. He knew that he was no match for this level of power, and he would definitely be defeated. But as a top swordsman of the commandment yard of the Xiankong Temple, he thought that he had to block the iron sword for a moment, and he could not let down the dignity of the Buddhism sect. Therefore, he refused to let go of the iron cudgel and held it tightly. In the eyes of the bystanders, the iron sword just touched the monk's iron cudgel and then left. The figure in the dust ignored the leader of the soldier monk and walked calmly past him. Boom, 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 boom. It was not until then that the real thunder exploded in the body of the leader of the soldier monk. His fingers were all broken into pieces, his wrist was broken into 2 pieces, and then his arm. The 2 arms of the leader of the soldier monk that were holding the iron cudgel were directly shattered into 2 pieces of flesh and blood by the iron sword, and then disappeared with the dust in the wilderness. With a miserable scream, the leader of the soldier monk knelt on the ground in pain. His face was extremely pale, and he wanted to hit his head to relieve the pain, but it was already impossible. The dust gradually settled, and the figure gradually appeared in front of everyone. His hair was very short, and the sharp stubble was like a forest of swords in the academy, facing the high and cold sky. His right arm was broken, but there was no wrinkle on the gently swinging sleeve. He wore a khaki frock, which had not been washed for a year, and was full of dust and blood at this moment, very dirty. But his expression was as if he was wearing a luxurious robe to participate in an ancient sacrificial ceremony. His expression was still calm and proud. His face was smeared with blood, his frock was stained with blood, and the iron sword in his left hand was dripping with blood. He was covered in blood. Judging from his appearance, he was just an ordinary monk. But when he walked out of the bloody battlefield, he was like a blood Buddha walking out of hell. There was a dead silence in the wilderness. Qin Yin and the elders of the commandment hall looked at the proudest and most terrifying Mr. Second in the back of the mountain of the academy, and thought of all the people he had killed in the underground world this year. They sighed and said, "Buddha is merciful." He said, "Buddha is pitiful." Qin Yin put his palms together and said, "That year in front of the Verdant Canyon, you fought against thousands of soldiers. But this is not the Verdant Canyon, but the Buddha land. Without the help of the academy, You have no chance of winning even if you fight until the end of time. He said, "A scholar is a gentleman, and a scholar must be resolute. The responsibility is heavy, and the road is long. Isn't it also heavy to be benevolent? Isn't it also long after death?" Qin Yin said, "You don't know the way, how about it?" He looked at the monks in front of him and said expressionlessly, "My name is Jun Mo. I have been taught by the teacher, and I only wish to be a gentleman in this life. Those who dare to stop me will die without a burial place." The third chapter, this chapter is 2000. I was a bit confused just now, so I finished the second chapter at 10:30, but I forgot to publish it. I will try to finish the fourth chapter before 2 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.